Current events take place in dystopia. The planet continued to exist, no matter what. In this world, people have never been equal, and the only important task was to survive in this game. The world that everyone knew was destroyed. This war affected everyone without exception. Death and pain have become commonplace. To survive, you had to fight, move forward, and not give up. The planet was destroyed. Explosions took hundreds of lives. There was less and less hope for salvation. And it all started because of one person. There was a general who won the World War. This man was satisfied with what he had achieved, but he wanted more. This terrible, strong man held humanity in his hands, tying everything together. Human lives were of no value to him. For him, it was just a resource to achieve his goals. The first thing he did was take away equality and freedom from people. Pain and destruction. That's what awaited them all. This person drew clear class boundaries between people, dividing them by age, nationality, skin color, and other characteristics. All this was done with only one goal: to justify cruelty. He treated people psychologically for a long time, erasing all ideas about morality and morality. As a result, for modern people, the death of another person has become a common occurrence. Death has become no more important than garbage lying on the street. At first, people were terrified, but time and psychological treatment did their job. People had to survive by going over their heads. As a result, the general turned from a dictator into an ideologist. Without encountering any resistance on his way, this man soon turned from an ideologist into an emperor who ruled the whole world. The general openly said that their goal was destruction, and people, perceiving this as inevitable, resignedly submitted. The emperor liked to say that in order to destroy the wall, changes are necessary. This was his most famous slogan, which everyone applauded. People, without even thinking about the meaning of what was said, joyfully exclaimed to him. The people rejoiced at such changes. Absolutely everyone has gone crazy. And those who did not go crazy were considered abnormal. Among the distraught people who started the war, there was also the main character. The so-called distraught people had one goal: the enemy, who needed to be destroyed. The enemy was not an ordinary person. Things were much worse. We had to fight monsters. The forces were unequal because the monsters were not only strong and excellently equipped, but in addition, they also had intelligence. There were moments when the main character was on the verge of despair. It was a survival game in which only one would survive. The monsters were disproportionately large, and the chances for people were slim, but they still existed. The main character swore to himself that he must certainly survive on this battlefield. Despite the already difficult situation, conflicts occurred between ordinary people. The man sank to the ground, begged for mercy. Without further ado, he laid down his weapon, hoping that this would somehow resolve the situation. But, alas, the one who pointed the weapon at him thought differently. The voice above him sounded like a sentence. Nothing could be done. The girl paused, escalating the situation even more. There was no regret or sympathy in her eyes. The man on his knees begged to spare him, but his request did not have the desired effect. The girl fired a shot at point-blank range. All this was shown on the TV screen. The children looked at it without a shadow of fear or anxiety and seemed to like what they saw. There was a fireworks display, which the people standing on the street greeted with delight and applause. From millions of sparks, an inscription was drawn in the sky, announcing the victory. People looked at the heavenly show as if spellbound. They were happy. They didn't even think about their future. The girl who committed the murder fell to her knees, exhausted. A cry of despair and hopelessness pierced the air. Or perhaps it was the delight of realizing his victory. Tears streamed from her eyes, but, as she herself said, nothing could be done. People who watched this creepy show on TV noticed a mix of emotions in the winner. Yes, she burst into tears. A spectator in a wheelchair watched this show without sharing the general delight. She could not determine why the winner reacted so violently and whether it was the joy of victory or a cry due to guilt. A silhouette of a man appeared in the front doorway. Seeing the girl in front of the TV screen, the main character guessed that she most likely was not sleeping. Putting the bag on the table, Victor glanced at the screen. The bloody show was still being shown there. Approaching the girl in the stroller, the main character put his palms on her eyes, saying that now, finally, he was home. Julia, of course, was glad to see her husband at home, grumbling good-naturedly that he interrupted watching the show at the most interesting point. Approaching the table, Victor began to quickly cook something, mentioning that they owe a lot to Julia's brother. Seeing the reproach in his wife's gaze, the main character hastened to apologize. The girl was also worried about this moment, but she tried not to raise this topic again. The young man looked thoughtfully at his wife. He would like to change a lot because due to her disability, the girl's life was gray, limited only to home and watching shows on TV. The city was almost asleep. The roofs of the houses were covered with pre-sunset haze, and the sun was already setting behind the horizon, coloring the sky with a pink-red glow. The main character and his wife were sleeping peacefully. It seemed that it would be an ordinary morning with the same measured, no different day. A sudden noise outside the window abruptly woke up the guy. He sat down on the bed, trying not to wake Julia, but the girl's sleep was too light. His attention was drawn to the window. There was someone outside. Feeling some kind of incomprehensible anxiety, Julia perked up, but her husband asked her to be quiet and not get up. He stood at the window, listening intently to what was happening there. There were robots outside the window conducting a raid to identify violators of social norms. Law enforcement officials warned that they were checking for ideology and censorship. They expected full cooperation from the townspeople. According to the conditions, all citizens of the third level must follow the instructions of the police for their own safety. People's screams were heard from the street. Julia sat on the bed, cowering in fear, while her husband quietly watched what was happening outside the window. Robots combed the area, looking for intruders. Some of the wrong people have already been detained. The sixth sense told the main character that it was necessary to urgently take safety measures. He quietly called out to his wife. The girl sat on the bed, dumbfounded, watching as Victor hastily packed his things into a bag. He told his wife that they would have to go to her brother, asking him to sit quietly for now. Meanwhile, the raid on the violators continued. Law enforcement officers unceremoniously dragged the unfortunate people to their cars. The main character took Julia out into the courtyard of the house, trying to behave as quietly as possible. Unlubricated axles of the wheelchair, as luck would have it, creaked. The loudspeaker continued to broadcast that all citizens of the third level should follow the instructions of the police for the sake of safety. In some apartments, the windows were burning brightly. It looked like something was burning there. Victor tried to leave this terrible place as quickly as possible. The police warned that in case of non-compliance with the instructions, in accordance with the law on special control, they have the right to use weapons. The main character tried to move as quickly as possible. It was very scary, and besides, the stroller continued to creak treacherously. A sudden sharp pain in the lower back forced Victor to stop, screaming loudly in surprise. There was a policeman behind him, and without warning he hit the man on the back. In addition to the blow, the main character's body was struck by an electric discharge. According to the law enforcement officers had the right to use stun guns on offenders. Unable to withstand such a blow, the man fell to the ground and almost lost consciousness. The guards did not stand on ceremony with the disabled girl. She was kicked out of the stroller with a kick. Finally losing consciousness, the main character called his wife with the last of his strength. The girl was very scared. She already knew how it would all end. While Victor was lying on the ground, law enforcement officers carried out a scan. The scanning was carried out for the purpose of personal identification. Facial and pupil data were verified. After all this, the main character was informed that, according to the control law, he was detained. For the identified offense, he is sentenced to 5 years in prison. The policeman grabbed Victor by the hair, intending to drag him into the car, like everyone else before. Julia was sobbing, trying to shout to her husband. The system easily determined the type of activity of the detainee. The database already indicated that Victor was a member of the resistance army with the rank of captain. There was a guy standing near the police armored personnel carrier. He was leaning on the door, looking at something on his phone. Julia could not watch her husband being dragged away without sobbing. The poor girl was terrified as she tried to crawl to him. But Victor remained stoic. He only asked his wife not to approach. At this point, the police informed Victor that he was subject to arrest. An electric discharge was again passed through the man's body, while Julia, shaking with sobs, called Victor. He was already being dragged to the car. The poor girl had a terrible feeling. The main character tried to convince himself that this would quickly end and everything would fall into place again. It was painful for Victor to watch Julia sob. He tried to reassure his wife that everything was fine with him and that this would not last long. The man promised that everything would end soon. This is just a temporary nightmare. The poor girl was simply out of her mind from grief and her own helplessness. Already in the car, Victor heard someone indignant about why this matter had not yet been ended. The voice reminded him that he had warned long ago that every last one of the rebels and witnesses should be killed. From these words, Victor became truly scared. The man to whom this voice belonged approached the place where Julia was. Pointing to the girl, he asked the policeman why he left witness number 839 alive. The policeman explained that she was not on the list, which means she was not subject to arrest. The commander grinned, answering that it was not for them to solve this problem. The scoundrel grabbed Julia by the hair and, calling out to the rebel, put a pistol to the girl's head. The commander, grinning, asked Victor who this girl was to him. The main character was silent. He did not know what answer would be correct to save his beloved wife's life. The scoundrel repeated his question again in a threatening tone. Victor looked intensely at the bastard, not daring to tell the truth. Julia looked at her husband with tears. She was ready to sacrifice herself just to save his life. Finally, the main character replied that this girl was no one to him. She is nothing to him. Julia did not expect such an answer. It turns out that her beloved husband just disowned her in front of everyone. The scoundrel smiled evilly, realizing the trick. In the end, the commander ordered the police to take Victor away. Julia didn't cry anymore. She just cried silently. The poor thing didn't understand what had just happened. The girl looked reproachfully at her husband. Tears streamed down her cheeks. The scoundrel looked angrily at the rebel, once again clarifying that apparently they were nobody to each other. After waiting a pause and not waiting for the rebel to confess, the bastard pulled the trigger. Unable to contain his anger, Victor screamed like a wounded animal. His heart burned with hatred and the realization that through his fault, the person most dear to him had just nearly died. The main character could not calm down. The guy was so out of his mind with anger that the police had to use their stun gun again. But this time the weapon did not work. Victor continued to resist. The main character desperately struggled, trying to get to the villain holding his beloved Julia. Victor still managed to break free and run out of the car. He almost reached Julia when he suddenly heard the trigger click behind him. The girl was silent. She had nothing more to say to her husband. Tears rolled down from her eyes. The policeman shot behind the main character. Victor felt blood on his forehead. There was also blood on his clothes. Realizing what had happened, the guy was speechless. Julia's face and hair were stained with blood. The girl felt herself falling and falling somewhere into the abyss, her frozen eyes looking straight through somewhere. The commander grinned at the two people whose lives he had just destroyed. This man was not capable of sympathy, and this situation seemed funny to him. Victor was still alive. He was lying on the ground, unable to rise. There was nowhere else to run. With a weakening voice, the main character tried to call Julia. She was very close, at arm's length, but the girl did not make a sound. Some unfamiliar girl was bending over Victor. With a mocking tone in her voice, she was surprised that he was still alive. The young lady put her foot on the shoulder of the wounded protagonist and mockingly asked if he was in pain. The commander interrupted the stranger's entertainment, suggesting that she still leave the two people alone. The bastard was in no hurry to leave. She continued to watch with curiosity how Victor was dying. In the fog of an elusive consciousness, the main character caught someone saying a children's rhyme. The last thing he heard were the words, "Remember, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Victor mentally said that he would remember until the very end. Consciousness had already left him. 5 years ago, the main character was released from prison. Then he didn't care about anything. He did not notice anything around him, did not grasp the meaning of the words spoken to him. It rained that day. A girl with an umbrella stopped next to him. She asked if everything was okay with him. This girl is so much like his Julia. She even tried to feed him, just like his beloved wife had once done. This unfamiliar girl became his savior. He woke up already in bed. An IV was connected to his arm. A guy was sitting on a chair next to the bed. A lot of time must have passed because the guy dozed off. Victor wasn't sure, but it seemed like it was his brother-in-law. There were bandages and water on the table nearby. That guy must have saved him. Victor tried to remember all the details. Scraps of information and pain floated into my head. Everything was filled with pain and hatred. The last memory is a law enforcement car, the scoundrel who shot Julia, and the scoundrel with his stupid rhyme. Hatred flared up with renewed vigor. He must take revenge. He must kill them all. The latest news was broadcast on TV. A criminal guilty of attempted murder of the Generalissimo has been caught. The culprit turned out to be the winner of the survival game, Sylvia Isevelt. The girl took advantage of the privilege of meeting with the Generalissimo and committed a crime. Her attempt was unsuccessful. She took advantage of the chaos and disappeared. The authorities believe that Sylvia Isevelt belongs to the residual rebel forces. It was also reported that the state had created a special counterinsurgency unit to deal with this problem. Lieutenant Miller took on the role of department head. The news said that Miller was promoted 2 ranks this morning. In addition, a press conference was held. The main character was beside himself with rage. He recognized the scoundrel. It was the same bastard who killed Julia. Miller boasted that their special squad is a team controlled not by robots, but by people. And mass arrests were made in connection with the attempted murder incident. It was mentioned at the press conference that since Lieutenant Miller is the son of the Generalissimo, his rapid promotion may be due to family ties. Miller explained that he called the press conference now, but their team acted according to plan yesterday. The scoundrel argued that for them, fame or family ties do not matter much. The main character was simply seething with anger. They killed his wife. Miller promised to prove that he achieved his status solely through his own efforts. Journalists said that there are rumors about the closure of the survival game. They were interested in what Miller had to say about this. The lieutenant assured that the game of survival would not be closed. Leaving the game in action is an order from the Generalissimo himself. Reporters were also interested in another question: whether Miller thought that the game needed improvements. The villain replied that the game does not need any changes, and they will continue in the same way regarding the number of people, dates, rules, and rewards for the winners. Then the journalists asked a provocative question. What would happen if there was another murder attempt? To which Miller replied that as long as their special squad exists, this will not happen again. Victor was angry at the whole world and at himself for his own powerlessness, but he had already set a task for himself, and this task would become the goal of his whole life. The host of the show once again reminded that Lieutenant Miller was with them. The game of survival will continue with a special squad providing security, and they are all looking forward to the next competition. From the surge of even more hatred, the main character clenched his teeth to the point of gnashing. It seemed that right now he was ready to tear the scoundrel Miller and his entire pack to shreds. The lieutenant enjoyed the moment of glory, promising to come to any place where he was called. Victor, in turn, promised that that place would become hell for both Miller and himself. After some time, when the main character recovered, he decided to visit his wife's grave. His brother-in-law showed him the place. The grave was unmarked. On the stones under the wooden cross, there was only a photo of Julia. Victor fell to his knees and burst into sobs. The pain was simply unbearable. The guy was out of his mind. He scratched the ground with his nails, rubbing his fingers into blood. Tears flowed in a continuous stream from his tormented heart. The brother-in-law waited patiently, not daring to interrupt this meeting. Finally, having calmed down a little, Victor asked, after he took revenge on them, to bury him next to Julia. Upon returning, the main character immediately began strength training. He must become many times stronger than he was in order to deal with evil. As an incentive, Victor kept with him a newspaper with a photograph of his fierce enemy. The main character did not let Miller out of sight, following his movements. The guy trained day after day with only one goal. He couldn't think of anything else. During one of these training sessions, Victor's brother-in-law came to see him. He was holding a sheet of paper in his hand. As it turned out, these were materials regarding the game of survival. Brother-in-law said that in order to receive basic privileges, you must pass the regional selection. While Victor was looking through the list of rules, his brother-in-law said that most of the representatives of the third class failed him. The main character was not afraid of difficulties. He had already made a decision. Victor reminded his brother-in-law that there was little time left and that he should prepare to escape. The brother-in-law thought for a moment and then carefully asked if he offered to run away together, whether Victor would agree. The main character did not even think about escaping. Otherwise, how would he look into the eyes of someone whose sister he did not save? For a minute, there was an awkward pause between the men. Brother-in-law understood what Victor was feeling now. The brother-in-law pointed to a bag standing next to him. There were food and some funds for other expenses. Victor gratefully extended his hand for a handshake. Now all that remains is to wait in the wings. The main character left the house and stopped in the middle of the street, thinking about what he had to go through. A crowd gathered in front of the fence guarded by the police. People gave their loved ones parting words and wishes for good luck. Everyone hoped that their son or daughter would return from this game alive. The players slowly headed to the starting point. Among them was Victor. At the entrance to the building, there was a low column with a monument to the Generalissimo, and there were also flags with his image. Looking at the picture of the dictator, Victor thought that glory would eventually await him. Finally, the gates opened, and the players were met by a man in uniform. People froze in anticipation of what he would say now. The man looked expectantly at the crowd, as if sizing them up. Without saying anything, the military man moved forward. The players followed him deeper into the building. Altogether, they approached the large forged door. The man in uniform stopped and raised his finger to the sensor. The system recognized its employee by responding with a sound signal. People looked at the building with curiosity, because partly it was a secret object. Finally, turning to the players, the man in uniform ordered everyone to wait here. The wait dragged on a little, and people, divided into small groups, communicated with each other. The main character leaned against the wall and thought. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice. It was a middle-aged man. He called out to Victor and asked a rather strange question. The man clarified that Victor, after all, is one of these. The main character asked what he meant by the word, "from these." The man pointed at the other players with his hand, explaining that he just wanted to say hello, because they were now in the same boat. Now Victor guessed that the man meant third class. The man looked conspiratorially at the main character and offered to unite. The proposal seemed so ridiculous to Victor that he didn't even bother to answer, simply turning away. The man tried to attract attention again, but the main character did not listen to him. Finally, the military guards came out of the corridor and stood along the wall. Following them, another person came out of the corridor. The man who came out was in a business suit. He greeted the players and said that he was pleased to see them. Pointing to his right, the man said that everyone present must put on the device. The device turned out to be a bracelet, which contained all the necessary information. After that, everyone will head to the arena. You just need to follow the instructions." The man snapped his fingers, activating the built-in mechanism. Some strange movement began, which pretty much scared some players. People didn't understand what was happening. The players were faced with mechanisms unknown to them, reminiscent of individual booths. The command was heard. "Open port." The door to the booth opened, revealing a leather seat with seat belts. Victor took his place, fastened his seat belts, and began to wait. The booth door closed and some process began. The numbers on the display changed. It was a countdown. The sensations were so unpleasant that the main character involuntarily closed his eyes and clenched his teeth. The ports all simultaneously rose sharply into the air, flames bursting from under them, as if from a space rocket. The cabin rose higher and higher. The unpleasant sensations gradually passed, and Victor opened his eyes, peering ahead. In front of him was a small, narrow window through which a strip of light came through. Finally, the cabin began to descend, and a special parachute opened above it. The aircraft landed, raising clouds of dust. There were trees all around, and mountains were visible a little further away. The area where the protagonist's port landed was called the Misty Forest. The guy screamed in surprise. It wasn't a very nice place. A hologram with marks appeared in front of Victor. The system notified about the probability of equipment dropping at an average level. Environmental factors were at low levels. The system determined the external danger as a very high level. The landing port location has not been determined. The changes in gravity during the flight were so great that when leaving the cabin, the main character vomited. Having tidied himself up a little, Victor decided that he needed to get out of this place as quickly as possible and as far away as possible. Having walked forward a little, the main character saw a small building. Every cell of the guy's body followed instinct. He needed to survive at any cost. The image of his beloved wife and also the face of his main enemy again appeared in his memory. The main character quickened his pace, trying to get to the right place as quickly as possible. He constantly repeated to himself that he had to survive. Finally, the guy got to this small house. There seemed to be no one inside. Victor looked around and began to check the situation. Noticing the chest of drawers, the guy opened the top drawer. Inside was a box with 2 matches. There was also a stick-shaped rocket launcher in the box. Also, the main character discovered a khaki raincoat. Looking back, Victor saw an axe stuck in the table. The guy pulled out an axe and left the house. The axe turned out to be surprisingly light. Victor considered it lucky to discover the weapon at the first point. At the same time, the main character has already realized that if there is an average level of equipment drop here, then there may be weapons in other places. Now Victor was faced with another task. He had to find food. He moved forward with a quick step. We had to hurry before the sun went down. The next structure that the main character encountered on the way was a half-destroyed 3-story building. The glass in the windows was broken. Be that as it may, Victor needed to inspect the building. Inside, the situation was even worse. The tiles on the floor were broken. There were cracks on the walls. In some places, the doors were torn off their hinges. The guy walked along the corridor and looked into one of the rooms. Judging by the furnishings and the remains of furniture, the building was of a medical type. It was actually a former mental hospital. Victor slowly looked through, meter by meter. Perhaps in this place you can find something that will be useful to him. On one of the walls there was an inscription, "Storage." The main character stopped in front of the door. There could be some medicines or items in this place that could be useful. At the same time, another person approached the building. The stranger stopped, listening intently. Victor entered the warehouse and lit a match. As expected, there were some medicines on the shelves. And most importantly, among other things, there was bottled water on the shelf. The guy couldn't resist taking a sip. There were bandages and some medicines on the floor. The main character hoped to find some food here, but there was none. Suddenly, Victor heard a noise. It was the sound of footsteps. Whoever is there is unlikely to be friendly. The main character put out the match and took the axe in his hand. Going out onto the staircase, the guy listened. It didn't seem to him. The sound of footsteps became more and more distinct. Broken glass crunched under the stranger's feet. It was heard that he was walking quite quickly. Having gone down the stairs, the main character hid on the side of the door and began to wait. The silhouette of a man appeared behind the door. He stopped to catch his breath. The stranger coughed. It was clear that he was not feeling well. Victor caught the smell of blood. The man was going to kill someone. He repeated this several times. The most terrible thing was that the stranger had a gun with him. The main character tensed up because the one who was behind the door turned his head and looked straight into this room. Victor couldn't tell whether he noticed him or not. The guy behind the door was talking to himself. He said that he had to act quickly. These words dispelled all doubts in the main character. He knew he had to strike first. Coming out of the doors, he looked with regret at the corpse of the man he had killed. At that moment, a beam of red light lit up right above the door. What this could mean is unclear. As it turned out, the camera recorded everything that happened. The two presenters were animatedly discussing what was on the screen. One of them said that he quickly gave up. And the other participants are also completely confused. Another presenter pointed to Victor, specifying the player's number. Number. Watching the main character examine the corpse, the presenter was surprised that the player immediately started farming. Player number 323 turned out to be pretty smart. The presenters continued to discuss the events on the screen. According to one of them, the place where Victor was the most visible point. The second confirmed that everything is so and everything else. The development team made a lot of effort. A hologram with a super warrior appeared on the presenter's table. The man said that all this was for the sake of regional selection. As a trophy, Victor received a gun intended for hunting. It has a bolt action. There are only 2 cartridges left in the gun. The main character never thought that he would ever feel so sorry for the shots. As it turned out, the man on the floor simply put the barrel in his mouth and pulled the trigger. He had documents with him. Victor was surprised. The second-class player committed suicide. There was a knife in the victim's backpack. Having examined the corpse, the main character discovered a wound on the dead man, but it was not from a knife. There was something strange about his wound. There were characteristic marks there. These marks looked like fangs or claws. Participants could not apply them. Victor remembered how this man repeated that he had to run. Be that as it may, the main character decided that he first needed to get out of here. It was already dark outside, but it would have been dangerous to stay in the building. Victor decided to spend time until dawn in a tree. He hung his backpack on a branch and tied himself with a rope to the tree trunk. It was 21 on the clock. After some time, fiery sparks, reminiscent of rain, began to fall to the ground. A group of participants was moving quickly ahead. Behind them was a ring of fire. At a certain point in time, the territory shrinks and the participants are driven into a circle. This is the tradition of the game of survival. The main character determined that the time for shortening the ring is from 9 to 12 in the evening. Victor knew that in a few days there would be no safe zones left. Suddenly, the figure of a girl appeared in front of the main character. The image of the girl was painfully familiar. She was alarmed, as if she wanted to warn him about something. It was she, Julia. Her lips whispered something silently. The words were inaudible. Victor asked again and clearly heard the word, "Get up." The main character looked at his watch. It showed the time for. It was 4:20 a.m. Victor didn't notice how quickly time flew by. The wind died down. The young man looked down and was horrified. The participants, illuminating the road with lanterns, quickly ran forward. They were chased by people armed with swords. The players were terribly scared, realizing that they were going to be eliminated. One of the participants looked up and noticed Victor sitting on a tree. The main character remembered this man. It was the old man who tried to get to know him at the beginning of the competition. At some point, the old man trips over a log lying on the ground and falls. He is quickly overtaken by a man with a sword. The main character knew that he could not get here. Victor held the gun, ready to fire at the right moment. He decided that he would kill the last one left. The man with the sword overtook the old man and began to strike with the sword. Having finished his work, the man with the sword stopped to catch his breath. Victor held him at gunpoint. The main character was in no hurry to shoot. Yes, that man below is the only one left. Victor was still in no hurry to shoot, but the man seemed to feel something. His eyes intensely peered into the darkness. A moment later, another figure in black appeared right behind the player. It was someone very creepy, like a monster, because the guy started screaming. The monster quickly approached the player and dealt a sharp blow with its sword. The guy seemed to be cut in half by a laser. Sensing something was wrong, Victor quickly jumped from the tree and ran as fast as he could. The main character tried to gain speed. This was the same external danger that the system warned about. Very high level of danger. Now Victor understood why the second-class player committed suicide. It was because of this monster. The developers of this game are just crazy. They only care about the rating. The monster quickly caught up with the main character, almost overtaking him. The guy was feverishly trying to figure out what to do now. Victor couldn't even imagine how many people this monster had already killed. This was already the 6th one this night. It was enough for the monster to identify the target, and he followed it straight ahead. The main character's neck became numb from tension. He felt that he was already losing strength. Victor understood that if he continued to run away, the monster would still catch him. To the right of the road, the guy noticed a small building. It might make sense to go there. Victor accelerated his run. The monster not only kept up, he was practically already at arm's length. The house was already very close. Only a few steps remained. The main character did not check whether the door was locked. He just jumped out the window, breaking the glass. Quickly getting his bearings, Victor turned to the window and took aim at the monster making its way inside. The swords attached to the monster's hands did not allow him to get into the opening, which was quite small for him. At some point, the monster abandoned this idea and disappeared from sight. The main character assumed that the monster decided to enter through the door. Something had to be done urgently. Victor suddenly jumped up from his seat and hid on the side of the door, waiting for the monster. The killer didn't have to wait long. He had almost gotten inside. The swords built into the hands quickly eliminated any obstacle. The monster was already half inside. The main character took an axe from his belt and swung it as hard as he could. The monster howled in pain. Blue blood flowed from his hand. While the monster was screaming outside the window, holding his wounded limb, Victor quickly jumped up and took a position opposite the window with a gun in his hands. It was necessary to use the moment and finish off the monster. The guy took aim and shot him right in the head. The shot turned out to be accurate. The monster screamed, bleeding. But the main character was in no hurry to relax. He was not 100% sure. Soon the screams died down. The shot turned out to be fatal. Victor was finally able to breathe easy. Those watching the game did not expect such an outcome. The boss was quite surprised that a third-class player managed to eliminate such a monster. On the large screen in front of the man, there was a schematic image of the playing field. The zones were marked with crosses. Turning to the operators, the boss asked to report on the situation in each of the zones. Staff reported that overall there were no deviations. Meanwhile, the monsters continued to kill the players. The boss was quite happy with this spectacle. In the end, one of the employees decided to contact her boss. The girl did not understand why these monsters were introduced in the qualifying round. The boss replied that this was an order from above, and there was no need to ask unnecessary questions here. The girl couldn't believe that this was an order from the party. The boss confirmed this, explaining that after testing is completed, the plan is to improve the monsters and use them in troubled areas. The girl did not know how to react to this, but the information was shocking. Seeing that the girl had nothing to object to, the boss ordered to check all the data properly. On the screen in front of the employee was an image of a super monster. The guy was trying to determine what the weakness of this character was. At this moment, the girl discovered something. She immediately called the boss. Others also discovered the problem. It was Object E. The boss, who arrived at the scene, demanded a report on the situation. The boss suggested that there was a mistake again, but the operator reported that the E7's hull was damaged. The monster was found to have 35% damage to its head and 25% damage to its right arm. The boss demanded to see the last recording before the damage. A recording of a shot fired from a gun appeared on the monitor. The shooter turned out to be a third-class player. After everything that happened, Victor left the forest house. The danger was eliminated, but the young man could not allow himself to relax, realizing that the real difficulties were just beginning. On top of everything else, the main character was angry with this game and with himself. Yesterday he lost too much blood. He felt slightly unwell and dizzy. But be that as it may, this is not a reason to feel sorry for yourself. You need to move forward, because the enemy does not sleep. Yesterday, during the battles, the guy lost too much, and even before that, its reserves were small. As luck would have it, the blade of the axe became dull. The gun is out of cartridges. Besides, there is little water left. It turns out that the only weapon left at the moment was a knife. It was 9:10 on the clock. There was very little time left. The main character moved forward with a quick step. Until the safe zone became smaller, the young man needed to get himself another weapon. A hill was visible ahead. What is behind it is unknown, but Victor didn't have much choice. He had to go forward. We need to find cartridges, as well as water and food. The main character understood that even if he cleared 1 or 2 rescue buildings, this would not be enough. Along the way, we came across the bodies of killed participants. Victor was not a timid person, but such an unsightly sight sent chills down his spine. As he moved forward, the main character felt that the air temperature began to rise. This means that the ring of fire is nearby. At night, they will reduce the zone again. This is the principle of this cruel game. And again, there were corpses on the road. This made me feel uneasy. Victor assumed that there must be a shelter somewhere nearby. Somewhere very close, the sounds of water were heard. The main character climbed a tree to get a better look at the area. Victor felt dizzy again. The situation was not very good. However, he saw a small river. The water was very close, and the young man, tormented by thirst, quickly walked there. The strange thing was that there was no one near the water. The water in the river was clean and so transparent that you could even see the underwater inhabitants. This meant that the water was safe to drink. The young man could not resist and plunged his face straight into the water. Having drunk enough, Victor took off his shoes and plunged his foot into the river. Having left his things on the shore, the main character entered the water to slightly refresh his body. Victor poured clean water into the flask and at the same time caught several crayfish to eat. My soul became a little calmer. The supply of water was made. Now it was urgent to find shelter. A sudden sharp sound interrupted his thoughts. There was someone nearby. The sounds of shots were heard. Victor fell to the ground with a sharp movement so as not to become a target. The main character felt severe pain in his hand. One of the bullets still hit him. Victor found a bandage in his bag and made a tourniquet. It was necessary to stop the bleeding. It is not clear where the bullet came from and what kind of shelling it was. The young man hid behind a stone and took a knife out of his bag. Now another problem has arisen. How to get out of here? Carefully emerging from behind the stone, Victor again discovered the corpses. It was obvious that they had only recently been here. The main character decided to examine the body. He touched the dead man's neck. Rigor after death remains only in the chin and cervical region. Apparently, this man died at least 2 hours ago. The young man felt uneasy again. He thought that he had relaxed too much. In this game, you need to always be on your guard. On top of everything else, there are always predators near the water, waiting for their prey. Victor needed to calm down and think everything through. He took off his cloak and hung it on the hanger he had built, and again the shot rang out. This time the bullet went through the cloak. The main character was in no hurry to approach the cloak. Looks like he was being watched. Judging by the trajectory and the sound of whistling bullets, the shooter is not that far away. Realizing that it was a man and not a monster who was shooting, Victor was confident that he was quite capable of dealing with him. The young man has a matured plan. He quickly dragged the corpse lying nearby to the stone. The shooter hid in the bushes nearby. He took aim again and fired. The bullet hit the leg, carelessly exposed from behind a stone. Screams were heard, and the body collapsed from behind a stone to the ground. The shooter fired another control shot to the head, and only after that, slowly, headed towards the corpse. The killer was irritated, believing that he had spent a lot of time on that hunt. Victor hid behind a stone and waited for the killer, but he was also cautious, as if he felt something. Approaching the body lying on the ground, the killer grinned with satisfaction. At the same moment, the main character jumped out to attack the relaxed hunter. The killer stared at the attacker in amazement, not expecting such a trick. Victor took advantage of the opportunity and stuck a knife into the scoundrel's neck. The stranger did not even have time to get his bearings. The weapon fell out of his hands. Victor did not finish off. He just stood and watched the enemy die. The stranger has a backpack with him. There will probably be something in it. Among the things this guy had was food. It was wonderful. Victor rummaged in the pockets of his opponent, who was still alive at that time, and there was a clip for 20 shots. On top of everything else, there was also exactly the same Remington. The main character was very pleased with his trophies. Victor finished the chocolate bar he found in the stranger's backpack. Now he felt much better. At least the feeling of hunger was no longer distracting. All that remains is to get to the safe zone, bypassing the ring of fire. Fog fell to the ground and it thickened every minute. But there is no way out. You need to move forward, no matter what. After some time, the fog suddenly gave way to fire. Victor didn't immediately know whether it was a ring of fire or just a fire. It was hard to breathe. When Victor was almost in despair, the image of his beloved Julia again appeared before him. The girl again warned about something, but I couldn't make out the words. The young man asked to repeat it. Julia's face changed dramatically. She screamed. The girl was literally burning in the fire. Victor sat tied to a tree trunk. The vision disappeared. The guy was so tired that he could not understand whether this vision was reality or he was just seeing a nightmare. This time the fire was so pronounced that it reached the place where the main character was sitting. The tree was already starting to burn. It was unbearable to endure any further. Victor was forced to leave his place and run as best he could. The young man still managed to run away to a place safe from the fire. He glanced at his watch. The dial read Zaruro. The fire continued, devouring everything around. It didn't look like the ring of fire it always was. In addition, one more nuance did not match. The clock showed the time after midnight, and the ring of fire decreases from 21 toward 0. Victor hurried to leave this place as quickly as possible. The main character remembered the promise he made to himself. He must win this competition in order to avenge Julia and his broken life. The fire was very close. It seems that the fire was overtaking Victor. Suddenly, a scream reached the young man. A man was screaming. He did not have time to escape the fire and was now barely moving, completely engulfed in flames. Other participants ran after the main character and ahead of him. For Victor, the most important thing now was to get out of this ring of fire. There was neither time nor opportunity to fight with the participants. 10 minutes ago, 2 men were talking at the control center. The person sitting in front once again clarified whether he really had to do this. The boss standing behind confirmed that the order must be followed. The operator did not dare to disobey. The system was given a command to forcefully reduce the area of E. The program confirmed the task, raising the indicators to the maximum. The boss leaned back in his chair and finally exhaled with relief. The man observed the state of the game segments displayed on the monitor. Screams were heard from sectors everywhere. One staff member reported that the number of participants was rapidly declining. Meanwhile, Victor continued to run as far as he could. He was already at his limit. The boss has long paid attention to an unusual player. The guy was good at surviving even in such a situation. Turning to the operator, the chief asked how things were going with The guy sitting at the computer replied that, based on the results of the check, there were no problems with the team to destroy the participants. But there was another problem. The manual control device was broken, and it would be difficult to restore it immediately. You will have to wait until the end of the competition until the automatic shutdown function works. The boss was not particularly upset, telling the operator to restore the device after everything was over. The boss couldn't get the unusual player out of his head. Now he'll have to bend over backwards. After all, one way or another, only a person can protest. Victor ran forward, almost no strength left. The other participants had already disappeared somewhere at that time. The main character noticed that the ring of fire suddenly began to shrink. The young man understood perfectly well that, just as in the case of monsters, the main idea was to get rid of a bunch of incompetent people. At this rate, the game will last until tomorrow at most. Suddenly, from the very thick of the fire, someone's hand appeared. The stranger grabbed the main character by the clothes. A fight broke out between them. Even though he was completely engulfed in fire, that man tried to kill Victor. The main character had no choice but to pull out his knife and stab the stranger in the side. The blow turned out to be quite strong, and the wounded enemy was forced to leave Victor alone. The opponent was seriously injured, but still dangerous. And so the main character decided to strike the decisive blow. The enemy was destroyed, and Victor hurried forward again. There's only a short distance left to go. The ID on the hand showed there were still 30 people left. No matter how hard it was to admit, there is not a single untouched corner here. The most important thing is that the main character still managed to escape from the ring of fire. The only thing is that the guy's hand was badly burned. Victor was unwell again, and he was forced to hit himself on the cheeks to come to his senses. The guy had to pour some water on himself to relieve the fever. In addition, the feeling of hunger was bothering me again, and the chocolate bar came in handy. The sky cleared up. The smoke was practically no longer noticeable. The main character could finally take a deep breath. The guy had a hard time, but the game will end soon. The number of participants continued to decrease. The main character took off his cloak. He was still hot. The ID on the hand showed that the number of participants was rapidly declining. And only Victor will be the one who will reach the very end and finish this game. In addition to the difficulties that the game developers provided, the participants themselves posed a danger to each other. Players eliminated each other in 7 possible ways. People killed each other in the most merciless way. Everything was used: axes, clubs, and firearms. Meanwhile, the ring of fire continued to shrink, reducing the participants' chances significantly. Even before the fire drives everyone into a death trap, many will be eliminated with the help of their own kind. The main character played by the rules. He threw away all moral principles. Now the main thing was to survive and reach the end. While one of the players was aiming at the other, Victor was aiming at him. Just one click of the gun, and there was one less enemy. The main character tried to move quickly, not allowing his opponent's bullets to overtake him. Suddenly, Victor's ear caught an unusual sound. People didn't make such sounds, so the observers of the game again released the monsters to hunt. The monster was already nearby. The main character clearly heard his breathing and gnashing of teeth. The monster killed everyone who got in his way. Although Victor already had experience with such a monster, there was no guarantee that this time the young man would be able to cope just as quickly. The main character started to run as best he could. In open areas, the monster had an advantage. Victor needed to run to a nearby building as quickly as possible, hide inside, and then navigate the situation. The main character ran as fast as he could. The bodies of killed players were already lying near the house. Perhaps this was the work of a monster. A little more, and the monster will overtake another of its victims. Having finally reached the house, Victor decided to climb onto the roof. In this place, it will be difficult for the monster to get to its prey. The monster was already near the house, but by that time the young man had safely taken refuge upstairs. Other players also did not lose sight of the monster, trying to kill it with firearms. The monster was practically invulnerable. Bullets did not take him, while he himself easily dealt with players who were unable to escape. Despite the fact that the players were rivals to each other, now they had a more serious enemy, and one of the guys made a reasonable proposal: to deal with the monster first. The monster tried to break into the house, and if the players do not decide to act together, then every single one will die. Victor felt safe. It seemed that the monster was not able to overcome such a height. But still, the main character was faced with the question of whether to kill the participants first or start with this creature. While some players died at the hands of the monster, others tried to kill it with firearms. Victor watched from the roof as the monster dealt with the participants. There were almost none of the participants left below. In any case, the young man decided to wait on the roof until the monster killed every last one of the participants. The device on the arm showed that there were 3 participants left. A second later, the system showed that there were only 2 players left. Victor continued to wait, and at that moment something caught his attention. Down there, right next to the house, stood a player. He was not afraid of an attack from a monster, as if he was 100% confident in his invulnerability. The next moment, the player burst into choice obscenities and began to shoot. At this moment, the monster was mercilessly cutting the player, and another participant was a few steps away from him. That other one was the last living rival of the main character. There were only 2 left in the game, he and Victor. A second later, the system showed that there were no more opponents left. Victor won. Only the monster remained below, and he felt that he had not finished his terrible reprisal. He needed to kill the last person. Victor noticed that one of the players was still showing signs of life. The monster, for some unknown reason, did not finish him off and even left him impaled on the tip of his weapon on his hand. The next moment, the monster still climbed onto the roof and was quickly approaching the main character. The young man shot at the monster, hoping only for a miracle. The monster was beside himself with rage. Victor held out the longest. Unable to stay on his feet, the main character flew down from the roof. A second later, the monster jumped down. The main character miraculously managed to dodge the blow. The young man quickly jumped up and ran forward. Victor never managed to break away to a decent distance. Suddenly, the guy felt a sharp, piercing pain in his side. The tip of the monster still pierced him. The monster pulled out his weapon, and at that moment, the main character felt that his legs were giving way, and he was falling. Just a moment separated the young man from death. With the last of his strength, he grabbed the pistol lying on the ground. The monster was already close to the main character. Victor fired, hoping it would help. The monster did not fall. The young man continued to shoot. The device on his arm showed the number of participants as 1, which meant that the guy the monster was dragging along died. The sensors on the monster's back were continuously glowing red all this time. It was strange, but the monster no longer tried to attack. Moreover, the color of the sensors on his back changed to green. The TV said that the last survivor was confirmed. The game was over. Now Victor could finally breathe deeply. He won. The management department closely monitored the game. The man asked the girl to hide the information, but she objected because the head of the department also saw the game. The man continued to insist on his own, and the girl had to give in. The employee understood that the boss knew better what to do. Moreover, this is the first time there has been such a cool game in the regional selection. The girl said that the installation plan has already been completely drawn up. She also added that this video will become a hot topic of discussion throughout the country. The lady asked if any official documents had arrived. Instead of answering, the man asked if his employee had carefully looked at the profile of this winner. But the girl frankly did not understand what significance this had. And then, the man told what the whole problem was. The winner belongs to the 3rd class. The employee was very surprised. What she heard was quite unexpected. The manager explained that there are many people who will not like the fact that a person from the lower class of society will become a national star. Therefore, there is no need to ask unnecessary questions, but do as you are told. The main character was exhausted. He didn't even have the strength to think. He was just trying to relax. The young man could not remember how long he had been asleep. Victor was in the hospital ward. Strangers sat nearby. They congratulated him and welcomed him to the city's training selection center. The main character could not understand what these people were talking about. The young man took the bottle of water handed to him and began to drink greedily. Meanwhile, the man sitting next to him asked if anything was bothering Victor. The main character did not understand what they wanted from him. He looked questioningly at the guest sitting next to him. The guest apologized for forgetting to introduce himself. They are guides helping participants. The man told Victor that his wounds received during the game were cured with the help of a biogenerative device in this institution. However, Victor was advised to refrain from excessive physical activity for several days. The main character still couldn't believe his eyes. A through wound in his left hand. Burns. Where did it all go? The guest laughed. Was the young man still surprised? The guide explained to the young man that until the next qualifying round began, he was free to use this training center, including all the various services here. The main character was interested in how much time was left before the qualifying round. The guest hesitated for a second. The man reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, explaining that the next game would be in a month. But in the meantime, the management asked to pass on something. The conductor put the document on the table and said that the management sincerely apologizes for the minor mistake. With this document, the young man can use all the local amenities. Victor tried to understand what was wrong here and what kind of error we were talking about. The main character had fresh memories of what he had been through. The entire previous nightmare was still before my eyes. The guy did not understand what a minor mistake we were talking about. The conductor apologized for taking up a lot of time. The guides hurried to leave the young man without answers to the mentioned question. Finally, the man mentioned that this qualifying round is very different from the regional selection, so Victor was strongly recommended to rest properly. Such incomprehensible behavior of the guests caused irritation in the young man. Having wished Victor good luck, the guests left. After thinking a little and not finding answers to the questions that interested him, the main character went down to the dining room. It was necessary to eat something to quickly restore strength, but there was no appetite. The young man recalled how he forced Julia to eat. This made my heart feel even heavier. There was always a shortage of food, and Julia pretended that she was not hungry. Victor sat, immersed in sorrowful memories. He didn't want to talk to anyone. The food seemed tasteless. The main character got up from the table, and on the way out gave his food to some guy. The only other thing he could consume is an energy bar. The qualifying round started soon. The host of the event warned that this qualifying round is not just a game of survival, it is a test of the abilities of the participants. In addition to the basic combat abilities of participants, leadership, ability to lead other people, ability to survive in crisis situations, and also social skills to get along with people will be assessed. When the main character entered the gym, those present immediately paid attention to him. People were actively discussing him, knowing that he was the winner of the E7 zone. There was also a shooting range here so that you could hone your skills in hitting the target accurately. Snatches of phrases reached Victor. People knew that he belonged to the third class. The main character tried not to pay attention to the conversations. He now needed to get in good shape. The young man decided to warm up on the treadmill first. Those present continued to watch him with curiosity. Victor trained hard every day, reading books and eating energy bars in between. So the days passed. People still discussed him, because the young man was not like them. The main character intended to bring himself to perfection. He looked for different ways on the internet and practiced his skills. The rest of the people allowed themselves to relax and have fun in their own way. Victor did not like such parties. Every time he came somewhere, people immediately paid attention to him. He always refused to drink, which aroused even greater interest in himself. In the eyes of others, the guy looked very strange. However, he didn't care much about that. He literally forced himself to eat normal food because he couldn't last long on energy bars alone. It seemed that the interest of those around him had diminished a little. People hardly discussed the main character anymore. But nevertheless, there were those whose interest increased even more. One of the guys could not contain his curiosity and approached Victor. The main character looked questioningly at the uninvited guest. The guest began the acquaintance immediately with a question. Victor is from the 3rd grade. The other guys also came up and watched the conversation with interest. Without waiting for an answer, the guest said that he heard this from the employees. The guy asked the main character if he was the same player who survived the system failure in E. The friends standing behind them chuckled in unison. Victor did not comment on anything. He did not want to enter into a conflict. Pushing the plate aside, the main character silently left the table. They shouted after him that he could not do anything because the third class were just worms. Victor endured the insult, convincing himself that all these were trifles. He set himself a completely different goal. The guy from high society continued to shout insults. It didn't matter to him who was in front of him, men or women. The upstart believed that all representatives of the third class should be destroyed. Every single one. Victor's emotions were heating up. He could no longer restrain himself. The main character grabbed the offender by the throat, and at that moment others intervened, demanding to stop. Visitors to the cafe were afraid that Victor would kill his offender. They asked him to stop. The main character was so angry that his hand automatically grabbed the hilt of his sword. Victor continued to squeeze the scoundrel's throat until he began to wheeze and choke. Suddenly, a characteristic crackling sound was heard, and a discharge of current stopped this conflict. The department representative stood proudly, holding a stun gun in his hand. Victor was lying on the floor. Two men in business suits approached the closed block and ordered the guard to open the door. The main character was placed in a closed cell. The visitor who entered looked at him with a hidden grin. The representative of the department recalled that Victor pointed a knife at the man, and if he had struck with this knife, he would have been disqualified. The main character did not answer anything, especially since the manager did not know the whole situation. The visitor argued that Victor was lucky, since that side also wants to settle everything quietly. The incident was over, and the management representative told the young man to follow him. The game would begin as scheduled. Victor silently followed the two men. The young man's attention was drawn to the open ports located on the left along the corridor. Soon they will be allowed back in to transport participants to some creepy place. It was announced over the loudspeaker that all participants should immediately proceed to the port. Victor bent down to pick up his backpack. Watching the main character go, the representative of the management said that the participants in the regional selection are just all sorts of rabble. But the participants in this qualifying round will be much more serious. Seeing that these words hurt Victor, the man added that all he could do now was hope that the young man would survive. The main character will remember this. He positioned himself inside the port and got ready. The countdown has begun. While the port was flying at a rapid speed, Victor convinced himself that he would definitely survive. He would win. Port landed in the mountains. Everything around was white. It was Snow Mountain. Victor peered into the distance, not even imagining what awaited him here. The system warned that the external danger here is at a high level, and environmental factors are at a very high level. It was extremely cold here, and the main character already regretted that he had not taken warmer clothes. His backpack contained only a survival knife, a flint, and a flask of water. Victor was upset. The prospect was far from optimistic. The young man landed higher than he expected. We needed to find a place to light a fire. The sensor on the watch showed a temperature of 30 degrees below zero. The main character understood that staying here was dangerous to his health. The time was before sunrise. It was necessary to wait for the sun to rise and go down, because the lower the altitude above sea level, the higher the temperature. Victor walked slowly along the slope. He needed to get his bearings properly. In general, the area was picturesque, and if it were not for the danger lurking, one could linger here and admire the winter beauty. Victor gave himself a firm determination. He can do anything. He will cope this time too. First, it was necessary to stock up on water. The young man filled his flask with snow. Snow will naturally melt based on body temperature. Victor slowly moved forward. He needed to find a safe place for the fire. There were small broken branches lying in the snow. The main character simply put them in his backpack. There were few branches, but the young man did not intend to stay too long. The main thing was to warm up a little by the fire and move on. Finally, the fire was made. Victor sat down by the fire, trying to warm his hands. Suddenly, a wolf howl was heard. The situation became even more serious. Victor peered into the distance, trying to see where the wolf was. Judging by the sound, he wasn't far away. Falling asleep in such a place would be extremely dangerous. Finally, a bright light illuminated the tops of the mountains, and the sun rose. All this time, the young man did not leave the fire. The snow around the fire had melted, and it was not so cold to sit. Dawn came, and the main character had to move on. He got up and put out the fire. Victor decided to continue descending down the slope. After some time, the main character discovered footprints in the snow. Judging by the size, these were the paws of a rodent. Along the way, the guy picked up more brushwood. Among them were branches that would serve another purpose. It was necessary to think about food. Victor sharpened several branches and made a trap for the beast. The main character hoped to catch at least one rabbit. At some point there was a noise. The young man could not even imagine what it was. Victor hid behind a tree and took out a knife. These were wolves. The animals sensed the presence of prey, hoping to satisfy their hunger. Victor looked out carefully and saw that a pack of wolves had surrounded the deer. The deer fought for its life with all its might, but there were too many wolves. They tore the animal apart and began to eat it. Taking advantage of the moment, the young man quickly ran out from behind the tree, trying to hide. He slid flat in the snow and lay down. Victor did not take his eyes off the flock, trying not to attract their attention. All the attention of the predators was focused on fresh meat. But suddenly, one of the animals looked up from eating its prey and turned its head towards Victor. The young man became truly scared. He pressed himself into the snow, trying not to give himself away. The wolf behaved strangely. The animal had a look as if it was initially aware of the human presence. Having finished eating, the wolves raised their muzzles upward and howled in unison. After this, the animals turned around and walked away, leaving behind a half-eaten carcass. Now the young man finally exhaled calmly. The danger is over. Having made sure that the flock had left, the young man approached the half-eaten carcass to cut off some meat. He pulled out a knife and got to work. There was no time to cook meat over the fire, and besides, the young man was very hungry. Having finished eating, Victor cleaned the knife and hid it in his backpack. He managed to survive again. It was also necessary to take bones from the animal's legs. Suddenly, there was a noise again. Someone was approaching. Another participant in the game approached the young man. It was a girl. It was clear from her gaze that she was very frightened. On top of everything else, it was noticeable that she was hungry. Her gaze was fixed on the deer carcass. Victor weighed all the possible dangers, although at this stage it was too early to think about it. Therefore, he gave the girl the opportunity to stock up on food. The girl took out a knife and began to cut the meat. The main character determined that the girl was not a pro, but at the same time skillfully wielded a knife. The young lady wielded the knife like an experienced butcher, cutting the meat down to the bone marrow. Leaving the girl near the carcass, Victor continued on his way. The stranger, seeing him leaving, muttered something like, "Thank you." The young man did not answer anything but simply moved on. A few minutes later, the system reported that Victor received 50 points for his social skill. Two men in the control center saw everything that was happening. Now they understand how the judges calculate the points. Although this was a fairly typical example. Another operator also praised Victor. Sophia's player also received 30 social skill points. Management staff continued to monitor the game. One of them recalled that the level of difficulty of this qualifying round is very high. It is the most difficult of all the previous ones. The second employee confirmed this because the environmental factors here are of the highest level. It turns out that in 2 days of the game, 12 people froze to death. The employees also mentioned that today, moreover, is a special day. The manager said that they have changes, and these changes will be colossal. Well, the game of survival continues. The hardest part is yet to come. Having walked a little forward, the main character unexpectedly discovered a cave. Now he had to decide whether to enter there or go another way. Victor listened. There was neither the smell of animals nor their traces in the cave. The young man decided that the cave was relatively safe. He lit a fire and sat down by the fire. Meanwhile, the snowstorm intensified. It was calm inside, although it is unknown what will happen next. The clock showed 2 minutes to midnight. The wind was getting stronger, but it was warm inside. The young man was getting sleepy, but a sudden noise instantly brought him out of his relaxed state. Jumping up from his seat, the main character ran to the exit to check the situation. An airplane circled over the cave, illuminating everything around with a spotlight. Victor tried to make a sign, but no one saw him. It is unclear for what purpose the plane arrived. After circling a little, the plane flew away, leaving the main character in bewilderment. Suddenly, the young man noticed that some kind of cargo was descending from the sky by parachute. Victor assumed that there were supplies there. The cargo landed approximately 1 kilometer from the cave. The supplies were most welcome now, but going up the mountain at such a time and in such weather was tantamount to suicide. Therefore, it would be wise to go there at sunrise. On the other hand, someone else may intercept the cargo, and if the young man takes the supplies now, he will have a very good chance of survival. The main character faced a dilemma: what to do correctly. High risk equals high return. The idea of taking everything right now seemed crazy. But if this is a winning option, then the guy will get the biggest jackpot. After weighing all possible risks and benefits, Victor went to the cargo landing site. The wind and frost only intensified. This was immediately felt on unprotected skin. The guy began to get seriously cold. His skin was stinging and it was becoming more and more difficult to walk. The cargo was not so far away. Victor even saw this place. The guy felt that he could still hold out. There was only a short distance left to go. Nevertheless, one cannot relax. Danger could lurk from everywhere. It was necessary to fully concentrate on the source of light that came from the location of the load. Despite the terrible cold, the young man persistently moved forward. There was the same landscape around: snow, trees, and darkness. Because of this monotony, Victor no longer determined how long he was walking and how much more he needed to go. Soon the young man felt that he was exhausted and had lost a lot of strength. He could barely stand on his feet. Everything around him was staggering and spinning. At some point, Victor felt with his hand in front and discovered an obstacle. There was a rock right in his path. It was too difficult to go around the rock. The young man spent too much time. He decides to climb up. Ledge after ledge, Victor slowly but surely moved up. There was very little left. Suddenly his leg slipped, and unable to maintain his balance, the guy hung by one arm. Wiping his fingers bloody, the main character held onto the ledge with his last strength. The situation was threatening. If the guy fell, he would most likely die. Trying to maintain the only point of support, Victor took out a knife and stuck it into the rock. With difficulty holding on so as not to fall, the young man moved higher. Finally, having climbed up, Victor collapsed exhaustedly. Now he could relax a little. After lying down for a while, the main character went up to the chest to check on the spot what was there. There were indeed food supplies inside. There were also winter clothes and some strange small object. The item turned out to be an injection for bioregeneration. This is exactly what saved the young man after the regional selections and before he was transported to the hospital. This was a very valuable thing. Even in the central government, few people know how to make this device. The main character decided to use the device right now. His hand was damaged, and he still had to get back to the cave. The young man understood that if he had this drug from the beginning, he would still feel sorry for it until he was wounded in battle. Now the guy needed emergency help, and he couldn't afford to risk going back with a wounded arm. Victor, without hesitation, brought the device to his hand and gave an injection. A minute later, a miracle happened. Everything began to heal instantly. On top of everything else, the body temperature has completely recovered. Having put himself in complete order, the young man sighed with relief. The critical moment was past. Now it was possible to continue calmly. The main character took warm clothes out of the chest and immediately put them on. Unfortunately, there were no weapons in the chest. The young man looked at the chest with sadness. He took everything that was there. However, what he found was enough for now. When dawn broke, other participants approached the chest. Seeing that they were ahead of them, they became terribly angry at their own slowness. The huge chest was completely empty, and the players had no choice but to kick the boxes out of anger. The players were so furious that they began to quarrel among themselves. Now they were all tormented by the question: who is this nimble, cunning man who was ahead of them? Among these players was Sophia, the girl whom the main character met at the deer carcass. Sophia's presence made the players even more angry. Apparently, the girl was not respected. The participants were ready to attack her with their fists. They were restrained solely by the fact that there was a girl in front of them. Lucas attacked Sophia with accusations and reproaches because it was she who advised them to come here at dawn, assuring that no one would get to the chest before them. One of his comrades tried to calm Lucas down. Apparently, whoever came here at night is a real psycho. Sophia already felt guilty. The girl watched in confusion as Lucas was furious, but she had nothing to say in her defense. There was no point in staying near the chest, and the guys decided to go back down, not paying attention to the crying Sophia. Looking back at the girl, Lucas gave her a look full of contempt and called her stupid. Sophia literally burst into tears, promising to improve and continue to try to be better. The guys went downstairs, leaving the girl aside. They didn't care about her tears. Already sitting by the fire, Victor counted his supplies. There were few products, but enough for the first time. Among other things, the young man discovered a bundle with some objects. Inside were tools, an axe, a hammer, and a hacksaw. These were exclusively tools for woodworking, not for hunting. Victor decided to immediately get down to business. The first thing he did was cut down the spruce tree growing near the cave. The young man began to strengthen the entrance to the cave. In addition, a bow and arrows could be made from wood. A few minutes later, the onion was ready. The door to the cave will serve as a reliable shelter from uninvited guests. Now, having a bow and arrows at his disposal, the main character felt much calmer. The snowstorm intensified even more. The main character could not see anything. There was a noise somewhere nearby. There was someone outside. Victor closed the door and began to listen. A roar was heard outside the door. Without a doubt, there was a bear there. The roar was characteristic of a Siberian brown bear. The main character gripped his bow tighter and got ready, but it seems the beast was far away. Victor decided that he had to protect himself even more. To do this, it was necessary to cut down another tree. The young man was not confident in the reliability of his structure. He understood that he had to be prepared for anything. Victor installed fences from the cut stakes. There were about a dozen of them. Animals who tried to get close found themselves mortally wounded. In the place where the sound came from yesterday, there was a wolf lying. The smell of ammonia was clearly heard in the air, and the main character decided to head in that direction. The first thing he discovered were traces of powerful claws on the tree. Victor was horrified by the size of the marks from these claws, which were located at a distance much higher than human height. The estimated height of the beast was approximately 3.5 meters. The young man was shocked by his conclusions. He had never seen a bear of such enormous size before. After analyzing all the signs, the main character came to different conclusions. No wild animal can reach such a size. This means that it could be the same modified monster as in the last game. While Victor was confused in his guesses, an animal was watching him from behind a tree. The beast was not alone. A pack of wolves approached the young man again. Feeling their predatory gaze on him, the guy turned around. Taking a closer look, the main character noticed that the wolves were frightened by something. They didn't even think about attacking. Taking advantage of the situation, the young man decided to get away from here. He walked slowly, but the animals did not catch up with him. Victor approached the left trap, but it was all in vain. No one was caught. All the traps set by the main character were empty. Every single one. The young man was already in despair when suddenly, in the very last of them, he noticed an animal. A hare was caught in a selkie. Victor did not expect that everything would be so problematic. Right near the cave, another surprise awaited the young man. A log fell on one side. The main character was confused about whether it was the wind that blew it away, or whether it was an animal that did it. However, Victor admitted the idea that there could be a person here. Out of the corner of his eye, the main character caught some movement to the right. He was being watched. The young man barely managed to dodge a piece of wood flying at him. Someone threw a bow at him, not realizing that this object would not cause much harm in this way. Already getting up, Victor saw a guy standing opposite him. His opponent was very angry, and now, apparently, decided to even the score for the recent conflict. Fearing for his own life, Victor grabbed the knife, and this time no one will stop him. The uninvited guest had a spear in his hands. The main character just had a knife, and now the enemy was deliberately provoking Victor into a conflict. The scoundrel threw a spear at his opponent in order to distract his attention. Victor repelled the attack without taking his eyes off his enemy. Running closer, the guest also pulled out his knife. He was extremely determined. Without realizing his actions, the enemy tried to strike with his weapon, but Victor constantly dodged. The main character did not consider such measures to be correct, so he limited himself to punching him in order to calm down the raging fool a little. The young man kept the knife at the ready, but so far refrained from such drastic actions. The enemy deliberately continued to attack, and the main character had no choice but to strike back. The knife slashed the opponent's hand. But even this warning did not stop the fool. He continued to attack Victor. Realizing that he could not defeat Victor, the guy demanded to retreat. But the conflict has already crossed the acceptable line. The main character, while maintaining sober thinking, demanded that no one approach him. It seems that the guest has finally realized who he is dealing with. The fool decided not to continue the fight and hastily left. But alas, the permissible limit was violated, and Victor could no longer control himself. He picked up a bow and aimed at the back of his fleeing opponent. Another moment and the arrow flew with a whistle towards the guy, hitting the target exactly. The opponent was well armed, he had a knife and basic equipment. There was no point in covering up the traces of the crime. After a while, wild animals would gather here. Leaving everything as it was, the main character returned to his cave. But another surprise awaited him there. Someone else came here. The snow was full of human footprints. Victor took a closer look. This time the footprints were smaller and clearly belonged to a completely different person. Having reached a certain place, the tracks sharply turned back. Whoever came here was just hanging around. It was clear that this man was not pursuing any specific goal. Besides the traces, Victor discovered something else. A long hair lay in the snow. The main character picked up his hair and looked carefully. The hair was brown. He had already seen this somewhere. Sophia tiredly walked to the group's location. The guys didn't even notice her absence. One of them asked where she had been. The girl admitted that she was just looking for something to eat. Sophia did not approach the fire, but sat to the side, leaning her back against the rock. The guys didn't believe her words. They were at a loss as to what she was really doing. Despite the small food supplies, the main character did not miss the opportunity to catch a wild animal. This time, a roe deer wandered near his cave. Victor hid behind a stone and began to watch the animal. The young man stood up and took aim at the unsuspecting animal. The arrow hit the target. The roe deer reared up, screaming in pain. A minute later, the animal collapsed on the snow and fell silent. The main character took out a knife and prepared to cut up the carcass. Managers from the department, as always, carefully watched the participants. One of them reminded that Victor's behavior corresponded to what they should have been taught. The man with a mustache corrected his judgment, because the whole point is that there has not yet been a single game or program that would have focused attention on such actions. In other words, the main slogans of this game: by doing this, you will survive, and this is the best of the optimal options. As for Victor directly, the same man clarified that the course of action of this player differs from the actions of previous participants. And other board members share the same opinion. However, the manager admitted that Victor is one of the most interesting and smartest participants he has ever seen. In his opinion, Victor, as a player, shows the most basic methods, as if it were an introduction to survival. The next day, the main character went out again to check the surroundings. He didn't sleep well again. He couldn't relax here. The young man constantly heard someone's screams as if someone was attacking them. Most likely, there is a bear operating here. Be that as it may, Victor understood that he had to prepare thoroughly. The main character admitted that one day his turn would come to him. To somehow distract himself from disturbing thoughts, the young man carved something out of wood. A blizzard was howling outside the door. Victor was feeling sleepy, but he struggled with this state in every possible way. He could not fall asleep. He has already made several traps. Then the young man repaired the door, strengthening the entrance to the cave even more. Now the task was to make weapons for the fight and prepare for anything. Preparations were finally completed. The young man cut out several toys from the remaining pieces of wood so that it would not be so sad. Suddenly there was a noise outside the door. The main character guessed that a bear had come to him. Victor took a spear in his hands and prepared to defend himself. The seemingly strong door could not withstand the bear's blow. The beast broke a hole in the door and was now looking into the cave. The young man grabbed the spear more tightly and poked it with all his might at the bear. A heart-rending roar of a wounded beast was heard. The spear was covered in blood. All this angered the bear even more, and he began to attack the barrier. The beast continued to break into the door. Victor tried to repel the attack because, as it turned out, the door was not so reliable. The main character struck the bear as hard as he could, and in the end, the beast fell silent. But whether he left is unknown. The watch on the young man's hand made a sound. This was inappropriate, because the sound could attract the beast again. Suddenly, the bear looked into the broken door again. Victor was terrified that everything would really start all over again. The beast attacked the door, attacking the obstacle with redoubled force. The blow of the bear's paws was so strong that the young man was thrown back. The prospect was bleak. The beast burst into the home and stood threateningly over the wounded man. Victor's vision became blurred. There was blood on his jacket from a laceration. A moment later, the bear grabbed the young man with his powerful paws and lifted him straight in front of him. The main character met the eyes of the monster, burning with hatred. Victor had only one tiny chance to survive. The young man grabbed a knife. The beast opened its huge mouth and let out a frantic roar, which made the young man's insides go cold. For Victor, this could be the last thing he sees in his life. The main character was not ready to die like that. Not like that. The game of survival was still not over, and the guy stabbed the beast right in the side with a knife. At this moment, Victor notices that this bear is not just a wild animal. This is a programmed mechanism, and the front camera of this biorobot is broken. The bear lost control. Taking advantage of the moment, Victor crawled to the side. With the last of his strength, the main character crawled out of the cave, trying to hide as far as possible from this monster. Victor got up to leave the cave, but the beast came out too. The young man moved forward. The bear relentlessly followed him, focusing on the smell of a person. The main character was seriously wounded, and the beast followed the smell of blood. The guy tried to increase the distance between himself and the monster. He still had to break away a little. Victor was exhausted, and exhausted, his wounded body refused to obey. At some point, the young man fell. The bear loomed over him menacingly, intending to tear him to pieces. Fortunately, the main character was right next to the stakes of the trap. He crawled forward a little, luring the poorly seeing animal right onto these stakes. The young man's plan was successful. The stakes pierced the monster through and through. The bear roared furiously in pain, but still tried to attack. The main character needed to finish off the animal. He raised his bow and took aim at the beast. The released arrow pierced the bear's paw, and the beast roared even louder in pain. The next arrow hit the bear in the chest. The beast was still on its feet. The young man fired again. There was no time to waste while the trap held the bear. The young man took aim again. This time the target was to be the bear's eye. It is at this moment that the bow in the hands of the protagonist cannot withstand the tension and breaks. The logs of the trap also cannot withstand the pressure of an angry animal and begin to crack. In the end, the wooden structure is broken into pieces. There was no longer any obstacle between Victor and the monster. The main character was facing imminent death. But at that moment, something else happened. Wolves ran from all over the area to the place of the fight, and it is unlikely that they approached with good intentions. The situation became even more threatening. On one side, an angry bear was approaching the young man. On the other side, other wild animals were running. The bear had several arrows, but that did not stop him. But as soon as the wolves approached, a miracle happened. Animals attacked the wounded bear from all sides. The leader of the pack himself did not participate in the attack. He stood and looked into Victor's eyes. The young man recognized him. It was the same leader whom he had seen at the deer carcass. Meanwhile, the pack continued to shred the bear. One of the wolves had already grabbed the monster's neck. The bear could not do anything. There were too many wolves. In addition, the bite in the neck turned out to be fatal for the monster. He fell and did not move anymore. The leader came close to the lying monster, as if he wanted to make sure that he was really dead. The tracking device fell out of the monster's body and lay nearby in the snow. The leader picked up the camera and immediately chewed it to pieces. The main character did not leave. On the contrary, he was no longer afraid of wolves. The young man dropped to one knee, expressing gratitude to the pack for saving his life. The young man and the leader looked at each other, understanding everything without words. It seemed to Victor that the beast was telling him to come back. The flock slowly moved away. The leader looked back at the young man again and followed them, leaving the main character near the carcass of the killed monster. Victor returned to the cave. Having taken off his outer clothing, the guy began to stitch up the wounds. The damage was quite serious. He had already lost count of how many stitches were placed. Having finished treating the wounds, the main character put on warm clothes again and lay down on the floor. For the first time in the entire game, the young man finally fell soundly asleep. 6 days have passed since that terrible incident. The 7th day has come, the last. Victor was fast asleep. The main character was awakened by the sound of an alert on the watch. The system notified that the last 7th day had arrived. No matter how much hostility there was, all participants had to gather at the assembly point. The distance to the meeting place was approximately 1 kilometer. The young man decided to take as little as possible with him. It was difficult for him to move even around the cave. His wounds still ached. The young man looked around his shelter for the last time. Everything here seemed so cozy. Leaving the wooden toys, Victor said goodbye to his temporary home and went to the exit. Several players were already present at the participants' meeting point. There the main character was met by guards. Seeing the young man, one of them showed where to go. Sophia and Lucas were already among those present. They immediately noticed Victor. The young people exchanged glances full of hostility. Lucas decided to provoke conflict again. Taking out his knife, he called Victor an insect. Some time ago, Sophia's father explained that everything he does is for the sake of the family. The girl did not even resist her father's decision. It was not uncommon for a player from a second-class family to be sold for a colossal amount of money. The father did not even feel remorse for selling his own child. It just so happened that the first person she met after selling herself was Lucas. So the girl followed Lucas and shouldered an unbearable burden. Lucas didn't appreciate the girl. He was capricious and treated her like an animal. Sophia, as best she could, played the role prepared for her. So that Lucas could earn points, the girl embellished situations. It also happened that she had to play not by the rules. And then one day, something happened that made life look like a nightmare, reaching its irrevocable point. This happened at the moment when Lucas decided to enter into a confrontation with a player who was lower in rank. Lucas then crossed the line of what was permitted, feeling his impunity, and only by luck did he remain unharmed. Victor at that moment appeared before her in a negative light. All she remembered was his long hair, angry face and eyes, clouded with hatred and anger of unknown depth. That incident caused a storm of emotions in Sophia and brought her back to reality. A terrible Lucas, lying exhausted, appeared before her eyes. In fact, he was not a monster, he was just a man. At that moment, the manager arrived in time and neutralized the conflict. If not for this, everything would have ended in tears. But one way or another, this incident changed the girl. Sophia felt something hot awaken in her. And then, when the qualifying round began, something else happened. Lucas, as usual, insulting Sophia, calling her stupid and useless. And so, at the same time, the girl met him again, Victor. The young man simply silently shared food with Sophia and suddenly disappeared. After that, every time the girl had time, she followed in Victor's footsteps. She watched his actions from afar, studied him, and clearly realizing what consequences awaited her, she helped Victor take possession of the supplies.
Sophia looked at the main character and then made a decision.
The girl decided that when this game was over, she would live her own life. But everything is not as simple as we would like. Lucas was watching Sophia as if he suspected something. And at one of these moments, the scoundrel decided to interfere with the girl. Just as Sophia was about to leave the team, Lucas rudely stopped her. But at that time, Victor had already become a good teacher for her and instilled new values. The main character was about to leave, but Lucas called out to him, reminding him that the game was not over before landing at the port. A knife flashed ominously in the scoundrel's hands. Victor looked around in anticipation. Internally, he was ready for anything. And after what he had been through, Lucas was only a minor nuisance to him. Sophia guessed what Lucas was up to. This man already caused her a feeling of deep rejection. The main character did not move. He did not want to enter into conflict, but he also did not intend to retreat. Lucas did not dare to attack first, and therefore in every possible way encouraged his team members to do so. One of the guys came close to Victor, threatening him with a knife. Sophia closed her eyes in fear. She didn't want to see what was about to happen. The main character reacted with lightning speed. The first attacker was neutralized, but another one was waiting for him ahead. This time the enemy intended to stab him in the neck, but Victor repelled the attack, although the knife went through his palm. Having firmly grabbed the attacker's hand, the main character stabbed the villain in the side with a knife. At this moment, another team member hurried to the aid of the scoundrel. As a result, both attackers were eliminated. Now the main instigator decided to join the fight. Pulling out his knife, he was already approaching Victor. The main character did not take his eyes off Lucas. Sophia was worried about Victor. He was seriously injured. Seeing that his opponent was seriously injured, Lucas grinned contentedly, wishing him death. Unable to stand aside any longer, Sophia decided to stop Lucas. The girl pulled out a knife and stabbed the scoundrel in the leg. Lucas was shocked by what happened. He did not expect a trick from this quiet woman, and now she has joined the ranks of his enemies. Taking advantage of the moment, Victor threw the attacker aside. Without expecting it, the girl unexpectedly gave the main character strength. Having dealt with all the attackers, Victor looked at the frightened Lucas. The time had come to get even with him for all the meanness. Realizing what he had done, Lucas now tried to stop the enemy approaching him. The scoundrel shouted that he was giving up, but it was too late. Victor was nearby, intending to finish the job. Lucas motivated by the fact that if Victor kills him here, he will be in serious trouble. On top of everything else, the scoundrel promised that upon his return he would immediately leave the game. But alas, the belated attempt to smooth out the conflict did not bring results. The main character, without a shadow of a doubt, plunged a knife into the neck of the offender. The young man watched with dim eyes as his enemy died with tears in his eyes. It was all over. Sophia and Victor were left standing among the lifeless bodies of those who considered themselves much higher and more significant. The head of the department stopped before reaching the house, and a girl came out to meet him. For several minutes they simply looked at each other in silence. The boss decided to interrupt the awkward pause. First of all, he decided to praise Abigail for overcoming many difficulties on the way to her goal. But the girl was not particularly happy about this visit. She asked the old man why he had come. The man responded by inviting Abigail to simply follow him. The girl silently got into the car and turned to the window. The boss tried to somehow get the young lady to talk because, as it turned out, she had again applied for an operator. The girl nodded her head distantly in response. The man reminded that this was already the third punishment. The boss picked up the envelope. An awkward silence reigned between them again. After being silent for a few seconds, the old man handed Abigail an envelope, specifying that it contained a list of participants. The girl glanced at the list with interest. The boss explained that he had noted the recommended participants, and she had to choose one of them. He pointed his finger at Victor's photo, making a significant pause. Abigail was silent, but the old man guessed what she was thinking about now. The man clarified that this guy single-handedly killed several people in the last competition, and his scores dropped sharply. And most likely, other operators will not sit idly by. The dossier stated that the guy's combat and survival skills were of the first level. At the same time, leadership skills were at level 5, and social skills reached Abigail noticed that this candidate's GPA was average, but she still asked the boss to contact him. The man only sighed in response, but the girl had already made her decision. Victor was lying on the bed under a drip. He again had to resort to medical help. The wounds were serious. The young man lifted his t-shirt and felt his stomach. There was no trace left of the wound. He sat down on the bed and pulled the needle out of his hand. He got out of bed to stretch his body. The room he was in was spacious, and the furnishings were richer than during his previous treatment. The young man noticed that the higher he rose, the greater the benefits. At that moment, the door opened, and a girl in uniform appeared on the threshold. The employee congratulated Victor on passing the qualifying round. The girl said that one day had passed since the end of the game. The main character thought, at that moment it seemed to him that more time had passed. The girl once again congratulated Victor on passing the city qualifying round, clarifying that she would now help him. The employee explained that the young man is now in the 3rd residential complex for participants. Here he has access to training, leisure, and there is also a small casino. However, the services here are provided free of charge. There was still a month before the final qualifying round, and, as the girl explained, during this time, all participants must work together with designated operators. Victor, looking up at the employee, asked again about the operator. The girl explained that the operator has already chosen Victor, and tomorrow in the first half of the day he must appear in the audience hall. Noticing that the main character was confused, the employee understood that all this news was quite unexpected for him. The girl bowed politely, saying that regarding the schedule, she would look at him tomorrow. As it became known, the participants who won the city qualifying round can be selected by operators from the first class. The knowledge and broad outlook of the operator is one of the decisive factors for achieving victory. They explain to Victor that the choice always remains with the operator, and if he has good scores, he will be contacted. At this moment, the main character wondered whether he needed an operator at all. Abigail was pursuing her own interests. For her, whose goal is revenge, this player will be like a hump. However, you will not be able to get rid of this hump at will. Having still not decided what he really needed, Victor decided to sleep for now and think about everything else in the morning. As soon as the main character began to doze off, there was another knock on the door. Reluctantly getting up, the young man lazily wandered to the door, not knowing who might be there. An even bigger surprise awaited the main character. A girl was standing on the threshold. It was a brunette. Victor recalled that he had already seen her somewhere. He remembered where. The young man saw this girl in the last game. Sophia was noticeably worried, trying to find the right words. The girl shifted from foot to foot. Victor did not invite her to enter. She said she was grateful to him. The main character was embarrassed. He did not understand what he had done that he could be grateful for. Suddenly, the girl said that she was praying for him. After these words, Victor finally understood what she was talking about. Now she was without glasses. Her look was naive and sincere. For the main character, all this looked somewhat strange because her entire group was dead. The girl said that her name is Sophia and that with all her heart she wishes Victor to win. The main character looked confused, not knowing what to say. Sophia thanked her again, bowing politely. Victor silently looked after her, without answering anything. The young man did not have any special emotions for her, and besides, he did not have time for this. The main character is deep in thought. Those who want to live leave, and those who should stay remain. And now he also faced a choice. Suddenly his gaze became serious and determined again. He needed to start running training again. The next day, Victor walked along the corridor, accompanied by an employee. The girl gave recommendations that he should dress well and be polite, and most importantly, he should never argue. The girl escorted the main character to the audience hall and stopped a little behind. There was no one in the hall. There was a table and 2 chairs right against the wall. The employee looked at her watch. It was almost. She said that the operator would come soon. Having once again reminded of all these recommendations, the girl left. Soon, the door to the audience hall opened, and a manager stood on the threshold with some girl. Approaching the table, the boss pushed back the chair, helping the girl to sit down. After this, the man bowed politely, leaving the interlocutors alone. Abigail looked at Victor silently, studying him. Finally, after 5 minutes, the girl asked why he was so desperate. The young man's answer was short and laconic. He just had to win. Abigail was quite satisfied with the answer. She did not ask for details. The girl extended her hand to the main character, saying that she was glad to meet you. And she also added that she must definitely become the operator of the winner. Victor silently looked closely at Abigail, trying to understand what kind of person she was. After a short pause, the interlocutors shook hands. Having finished the audience, the main character began training, firmly intending to go beyond basic training. His plans were to train on simulators to prepare for real combat and improve his weapon skills. In addition, it was necessary to extremely harden your body. Victor started by jogging to warm up his body. He was praised for his tenacity. The main character looked back and saw Abigail watching him. The girl was accompanied by another employee. She continued to watch her ward train. The young man did not have a sociable character. He silently ran circle after circle past Abigail and the guard who were standing. Having finished his run, the main character, without saying anything to his mentor, headed for the exit. Abigail and her employee followed him. In the end, Victor could not stand it and directly asked why they were following him. The girl was not satisfied with the too formal manner of communication of her ward. She suggested being a little more free. Catching the young man's ambiguous look, Abigail asked why he was looking with such regret. For some unknown reason, she was amused by Victor's stubborn silence. The main character went to the gym. Other players were already training there. Suddenly, Abigail pointed to another door, asking her charge, "What about this particular one?" The girl pointed to the room with simulators. The proposal was very logical. They all proceeded to the training room together. The main character immediately went to the simulator, but the mentor asked if he would mind if she customized his training at her discretion. Victor did not object. The girl showed where to stand. Approaching the control point, the mentor selected the necessary parameters. As expected, she suggested starting with something easy. Figures were visualized directly in front of the young man. Out of the corner of his eye, the main character noticed that figures were also visualized behind him. The mentor continued the adjustment, and Victor found himself in the center of the luminous sphere. The figures took on clearer outlines, turning into snowy mountains. The young man watched with delight what was happening. Abigail noticed this. The landscape was familiar to her ward. The next stage was the appearance of virtual opponents in front of the young man. The main character pulled out his weapon and got ready. Several robots that appeared immediately went on the attack. Virtual opponents behaved like real enemies. They attacked, trying to hurt the main character. Having finished with the settings, Abigail took out a cigarette. Watching her ward train, the girl asked a nearby employee what he thought about this young man. Victor intently watched every move of his opponents. It was obvious that he liked this kind of training. Employee Abigail appreciated the skills of this player. The young man showed promise. The girl was sure that her ward was already completely ready. However, if you touch him in vain, it will only cause mistrust. Abigail believed that at this stage the main thing was not to lose contact with him and give him wings so that he could fly. Meanwhile, the main character successfully destroyed all his opponents. Seeing that Victor had coped with the task too easily, Abigail complicated the task. Observing this stubborn young man, the manager mentally already ranked him as second rank. The enemy was quickly approaching the main character from behind. Victor literally felt it with his back. The robot tried to attack, but the young man deftly intercepted his steel hand. This time the opponent was already stronger than at the previous stage. However, this time the main character managed to defeat him. Abigail looked at her ward with admiration. He behaved well. All opponents were defeated, and Victor stood waiting for the next increase in difficulty. The mentor was pleased with her player, once again making sure that she had made the right bet. At the same time, in another place, someone was enjoying their power, demonstrating their superiority and impunity. The girl, who had previously been constantly present with Captain Miller, was now trying to teach a lesson to the soldier who came to hand. She didn't like the way he greeted her. A second before, she hit him on the leg with all her might and now enthusiastically wondered if it hurt him. After laughing at the soldiers, she headed for the exit, reminding them to be respectful. This person was in an evilly cheerful mood, and as she admitted to herself, now she would gladly kill 10 people. Time passed. The main character did not stop his training under the strict guidance of Abigail. The girl was interested in everything about this young man and the employee. At her request, tried to find out something about him. He said that Victor has neither a home nor a family. There were no records of his past. Abigail was even more interested in this guy. She wanted to know what was hidden behind his tenacity and desire to win at any cost. She asked her employee to dig into the information even more. Having finished training, Victor went to his apartment. In the morning, standing in the shower, he could finally allow himself to relax. Coming out of the shower, the main character headed towards the door. The frame glowed, notifying that a message had arrived. The system asked to press a button to read the message. The letter included an advertisement reminding all participants that today was Booster Day. Participants were given a choice of what was best for them to accept. The guy from the poster invited everyone to become as strong as him. Each participant was given a limit of 1 amplifier. The offer was tempting, and the main character decided to take advantage of it. The young man decisively pressed the confirmation button. Victor thought about it and pressed the call button. Abigail's surprised face appeared on the screen. The girl was surprised that he woke up so early. The main character stared at his mentor with a serious look. Abigail, still trying to establish a more informal relationship, asked the young man not to frown. Victor was silent. The girl did not insist on her opinion. She was aware that her ward had received a message about the amplifier, and therefore she reminded him to quickly go to the central market. The main character refused, causing bewilderment among the mentor. The young man explained that he had no money. Not understanding anything, the girl decided to personally check his accounts. She asked who sent him the money in this case. Victor explained that he received the money from Shane Bilhout. The young man was sure that Abigail knew him. Shane was the main character's brother-in-law and supported him as much as he could. Abigail fell silent abruptly. Victor could not understand the reasons for such drastic changes. The young man tried to shout to his mentor. He really couldn't understand what was wrong. His brother-in-law also watched his games. After Julia's death, Shane was the only person the main character considered family. Abigail was not herself from the anger that surged through her. The girl warned that in any case she would be waiting for Victor at the market, and if he dared not show up there, then serious troubles would await him. In a fit of emotion, Abigail even threatened to kill her charge. After hearing this, the main character did not know how to react, but there was no other choice but to go to the market. Victor had a certain amount of money with him, with which he intended to pay for the goods. The seller asked if Victor had anything else besides money, but the main character had nothing else. Abigail was waiting for him on the side, and when he approached her, she suggested leaving here before there were even more people. Without answering anything, the main character followed his mentor. The influx of buyers was outraged by the price increase. No one even bothered to warn people in advance. The sellers made excuses that this was all due to internal regulations, and they could not do anything about it. The manager, who came out in response to the shouting, tried to explain that such a decision was made this morning. But the crowd continued to be outraged. People were seething with indignation, demanding that the person responsible for everything that was happening come to them. Abigail, who had been silent until this moment, decided to intervene. The girl resolutely walked towards the manager. The girl openly accused the manager of wanting to remove the second class, who cannot afford to pay for everything they need, and at the same time fraudulently extort money from the first class, who are able to pay for anything. The girl demanded to confess everything. The guy didn't know how to get out of the situation. Abigail looked at him with a piercing gaze. Suddenly, the girl came close to the manager and whispered something in his ear. In response, the guy bowed, clearly expressing agreement. Turning around, Abigail called Victor. The manager put his hand on the sensor to open the door. Victor and his mentor went inside, finding themselves in a small store. The main character picked up a small device resembling a flask. This was that same power amplifier, an expensive but most sought-after amplifier among the participants. Turning to the seller, Victor asked if they had anything cheaper. Smiling, the seller offered to follow her. The three of them went into a warehouse where similar flasks lay in boxes. As the seller said, here were all the goods that were discontinued at that time. This product was intended to be thrown away due to unsuitability, so the price is relatively low. Victor took one of the amplifiers from the box. In appearance, it was the same flask, almost no different from its expensive counterpart. The main character suggested that this is an amplifier of emotions, checking with his mentor whether this is so. Abigail confirmed that it was some kind of stimulant. The mentor explained that in fact this item can hardly be called an amplifier, since at present it is used only for therapeutic purposes. Victor decided to purchase this item. Turning to the seller, the young man asked to pay him. The amplifier looked quite tolerable, and the young man was going to try it on himself. The seller calculated the cost, and the goods were purchased. Abigail sincerely did not understand such an act, but she could not influence the decision of her player in any way. Upon returning to the training center, the girl still asked if Victor was sure that this would be enough for him. Before leaving, Abigail advised the young man to get at least 1 day of good sleep. Victor lay down on the bed, not letting go of the purchased item. He was wondering what the effect of this amplifier was. The young man twirled it in his hands. Nothing remarkable in appearance, he had already dealt with similar things. Without waiting for the morning, the main character decided to test its effect. The substance was introduced, starting an immediate process. Abigail claimed that no noticeable physical changes would occur, but the guy began to feel afraid. Emotions rushed over the young man. He felt the fear of oblivion. On that ill-fated day, he himself died along with Julia. He has no reason left to live in this world. And if you forget about revenge, then he is just an empty shell. He will have to cultivate his hatred, all this for Julia and for his own sake. The final qualifying round will take place tomorrow. Everything Victor does now is for Julia. The next day, the start of the qualifying round was announced in the large hall. Those whose names are called will have to come forward and take earplugs. 2 people will name each. The main character was worried because all this was very important to him. The first lucky ones were Aiden and Alexander. The mentor told Victor to listen carefully because he would have to kill them all. The presenter continued to name names. Cynthia and Victor were named next. Cynthia, glowing with pride, walked forward. Victor froze in place. A hurricane of emotions raged inside him. He remembered this scoundrel. On that terrible night when Julia was killed, Cynthia stood over him and made fun of him. Everything inside the main character burned with anger and hatred towards this person. Cynthia was already standing next to the general, animatedly talking about something. They knew each other. The main character remembered how she stood over him then, surprised that he was still alive. Meanwhile, the presenter again called Victor's name, clarifying whether he was present here. With a decisive step, the main character headed to the right place. The thought was spinning in my head. To kill Cynthia. The young man did not notice anything. Everything that was happening was in a fog. His brain was already calculating murder options. Cynthia continued to smile at the general, arousing hatred of incredible proportions in Victor with her entire appearance. The young man restrained himself with incredible efforts. His imagination depicted an act of retribution in his head. He must kill this scum. Mentally, his hands were already squeezing Cynthia's throat. The guy's emotions just went wild. But still, the main character soberly assessed this situation. He understood how it would all end for him then. Abigail's words sounded in my head. Watch carefully, because he must kill them all. This is exactly what Victor will do. Now he must calm down. Those whom the main character must kill do not end with this scum. He will have to wait for the right moment. The main character came to his senses already in the portal. My mind gradually became clearer. The young man did not hear anything. However, the mentor warned that there would be no communication for 1 hour after the start of the game. Victor mentally rushed things. He did not have the strength to wait. Everything was boiling inside him again. Anger did not leave his mind, tearing his heart into pieces. It feels like the portal has finally landed. Everything around was surrounded by rising clouds of dust. The system notified that he was in a place called the Ruined City. The probability of equipment dropping was indicated as high. Environmental factors were also of a high level, while external danger was indicated as low. With a firm step, the main character moved forward. The city was empty. Neither people nor animals were visible. There was only suspicious silence around. Victor went down the steps. The concept for this map was a city in the middle of the desert. The young man slowly walked around the city, peering into every corner. In one of the rooms, the main character saw a suitcase lying on the floor. Opening it, Victor found a pistol and a bundle of fabric. The guy put the gun in his belt and tied the cloth around his head like a bandage. A sandstorm was approaching the city. It was dangerous to move forward. But still, the main character decided to continue his journey. Victor went down the stairs. You could hear the wind picking up outside. The lower floor was full of sand. The storm was already making its way inside the building. First of all, the main character decided to check the found weapon. It would be nice to still find food. The young man continued to explore the building. In one of the rooms on a shelf, he saw a small chest. It was a blue box that may have contained essential items inside. Victor was about to examine the found object, but suddenly something seemed strange to him. There were footprints on the floor. These were fresh footprints. While the main character was thinking, a figure appeared next to him with a huge hammer in his hands. The stranger swung and tried to attack. Victor barely had time to jump to the side. The hammer hit the floor with a roar. The attacker was quite large. He was watching Victor angrily. The stranger swung again, this time to hit more accurately. The main character assumed that the stranger most likely used a power amplifier. Despite its large size, the attacker was quite agile and fast. This time the enemy still managed to knock Victor down. The only thing the main character could counter such attacks with was a pistol. The young man took aim and fired. One shot was not enough for such a large enemy, and Victor fired several more times. All this time, Abigail was watching what was happening. Victor fired again, but the enemy stubbornly stood on his feet. The bullets in the gun ran out, and the main character was simply waiting for the next blow from the enemy. But he suddenly lowered the hammer to the ground and did not attack again. At this moment, the sound of a call sign was heard in the earphone. The young man clicked to listen. Abigail delightedly reported that he was being watched. The audience rejoiced. People loved this show. The giant collapsed to the floor from his wounds. Victor still defeated him. In a box found on a shelf, the main character found a police bulletproof vest, a light backpack, and safety glasses. The main character approached the exit and stopped. The storm was very serious. Abigail's voice asked if Victor was going to go outside. The mentor advised to be extremely careful and always look around. On Victor's way, there was another building, which the young man also intended to visit. Holding the gun at the ready, the main character slowly walked inside. Victor took off the bandage from his face to finally breathe in some air. The building he entered belonged to the police station. There were no footprints on the floor, which meant that the main character came here first. Abigail's voice sounded in the earphone, happily reporting that the young man had essentially hit the jackpot. The main character received an incredible chance to appropriate all the equipment for himself. It was necessary to quickly find this equipment and leave immediately. There was a door ahead, locked with a padlock. The equipment was most likely located there. One shot was enough to open the lock. The young man opened the door and looked inside. In the first opened box, the main character discovered a machine gun. It was an AR-15 model, and since this firearm is used for a long time, its functionality is not in doubt. Abigail was alarmed. About 3 hours had already passed. It was undesirable to stay in one place for a long time. Victor took a sip of water, and then took out an energy bar for a little refreshment. Time flew quickly. The clock was already showing 15. The main character left the building. The teacher urged him to get to a safe place before sunset. The young man moved forward again. It was still quite light outside. The wind calmed down a little, and the sandstorm was no longer so strong. Suddenly, something unusual appeared in front of the main character. He could not even imagine what it could mean. Abigail shouted for him to leave immediately and as quickly as possible. Victor had already guessed that he was in the sniper's sights. The young man abruptly jerked away, running to the side. Next to him there was a postal booth. The main character hid behind it, pressing his back tightly. Victor was frightened. He could hardly understand the meaning of his mentor's words. She demanded that he gather his thoughts and concentrate. The main character continued to sit at the booth, not daring to look out. He did not know in which direction to run. He needed to know the exact location of the correct position. Abigail named the location he needed, the 20th floor of the building at 7 o'clock. The young man took note. Now all that was left was to get there without incident. Victor stood up slightly above his cover and began to shoot. There was a sniper holed up in the house opposite on the top floor, and it was very difficult to hit this shooter. The bullet fired by Victor broke the glass in the window where the enemy was located. Now the main character was interested in only one thing. He hit the sniper or he simply calmed down for a while. An unexpected targeted shot from the enemy threw Victor back. The young man was saved by his body armor, which took the blow. The main character was lying on his back. It was difficult to breathe. The mentor ordered to hide immediately. Victor moved on all fours from the booth to the car standing next to him. The young man was dealing with a professional sniper, and therefore Abigail strongly advised not to shoot back. The main character pulled out the sniper bullet that had hit him from his body armor, and placing it on his palm, tried to determine from which weapon it was fired. The situation that Victor found himself in was not in his favor. There was no reliable shelter nearby, and besides, he was in the light. Meanwhile, the sniper continued his hunt, his weapon practically never stopping. Abigail understood that her ward was completely isolated. The teacher tried to shout to the young man so that he would come to his senses. The main character was on the verge of despair. He could not do anything. Abigail tried to support her player as much as possible, demanding that he not give up under any circumstances. At the same moment, the young man saw something approaching. It looked like clouds of dust and smoke. The system warned about high levels of environmental factors. And right now, this factor of nature, in the form of a curtain of sand and dust, was approaching directly towards the young man. The main character was not going to give up. He stood up to his full height, intending to do something. Pulling a mask over his face, Victor waited for the approach of this natural curtain. Having waited until the sand wall was level with him, the young man rushed straight into its midst. Victor quickly ran along with this natural curtain towards the building opposite. Having lost sight of his target, the sniper shot at random. The main character, without slowing down, continued to run forward. Having finally reached the building, the young man quickly jumped out the window and lay down on the floor. Pulling off his bandage, Victor greedily swallowed air. His heart was ready to jump out of his chest. The main character ran into the same building where the sniper was, and now the enemy was on the 20th floor. It was impossible to stop. The young man needed to eliminate the threat. Trying to move as quietly as possible, the main character headed upstairs. On the approaches to the 20th floor, the enemy opened fire. The main character clearly heard the enemy coming down. Suddenly, a grenade flew towards the young man. The ball fell nearby on the floor right at his feet. Victor did not expect such force majeure and now froze again in a daze. The next second there was an explosion of medium power. The young man was not injured and, taking advantage of the moment, ran upstairs again. The enemy was very close and the main character also started shooting. The bullets fired by Victor hit the wall right next to the enemy. Seeing how the sniper behaved, the main character had already guessed that the enemy's combat skills were worse than it seemed at the beginning. Victor moved forward without stopping shooting. The enemy also did not give up. His weapons did not fall silent for a minute. Moving closer and closer, the main character did not stop shooting. From time to time, hiding behind the ledges of walls and columns. Hiding behind a column, Victor fired, intending to exhaust the enemy. There was a small cover ahead, behind which a sniper was hiding, and the main character was shooting directly at him. The enemy fired back. It seemed that there would be no end to this shootout. For a minute, the main character stopped, catching his breath. Besides, he only had 2 clips left. At the same moment, Abigail's voice sounded in the earphone. The girl told Victor to focus his attention on the left. The main character strained his vision and hearing, waiting for the moment when the enemy would come closer. The cover behind which the enemy was located was empty. The sniper was nowhere to be seen. Near that place there was an iron door. Victor realized that the enemy had dived there. The main character lay down on the floor and from this position began to shoot, aiming as low as possible. The sniper did not have time to move to another room and was now again hiding behind a stone dais. The distance to the enemy was only 2 steps. And now Victor was thinking about how to overcome this distance. The main character took off with a jerk to get to his enemy. Judging by the screams and the lack of previous activity, the enemy was wounded. Victor covered the remaining distance in one leap and shot his opponent in the head. After examining the enemy's things, the main character discovered a map. We got a weapon as another trophy. Looking at his arsenal, the young man did not notice how quickly time flew by. It was already 9 o'clock in the evening. Abigail, seeing that her ward was tired, invited him to sleep a little and she would keep watch. Victor was not sure of the correctness of such a proposal, and then the mentor suggested another option. They would replace each other every 2 hours. This proposal suited the young man. He said that he would sleep first, because 12 hours had already passed and they had worked hard. The main character wrapped himself in a cloak and finally relaxed. But suddenly the noise outside drove away all sleep. Something was happening there. Houses collapsed like card structures. It was an earthquake. The main character was annoyed by this idiotic system. Compared to the current situation, the Ring of Fire was just a joke. Victor looked at the map again. He needed to move to the next safe place. The young man found this place on the map. An elevated road was indicated as a safe place. Victor looked at the enemy through the sight of his machine gun. The bullet went right through the opponent's thigh. The enemy was lying on the asphalt, screaming heart-rendingly. His leg was seriously injured. Another player immediately ran up to the wounded man, hoping to get some equipment for himself. But he too was caught by the protagonist's bullet. Victor chose a place with a good view. His opponents did not see him, while they themselves were clearly in front of the main character. So the second enemy screamed, clutching his shot leg. The main character continued to closely monitor the situation below. Abigail supported her ward. The girl wondered with admiration where he learned this. Without looking up from his sight, Victor replied that he acquired sniper skills while still at school. The main character's bullet caught another opponent. This time the shot hit the head. The interest with which Abigail followed Victor's actions indicated that the girl was once again convinced of the correctness of the choice she had made. 3 opponents were already lying on the asphalt below. Another one was standing nearby and exchanging fire with someone. The enemy with whom the player was exchanging fire was hiding behind a car. The situation was dragging on a little, and the mentor asked when Victor would finish everything. Still not looking up from his machine gun, the main character replied that soon. Another enemy was killed by his bullet, and another opponent was defeated. Well, it seems that everything is over. All the opponents were lying on the ground. The main character carefully went downstairs to collect all the trophies. Victor spread out a wide cloth and put all the goods there. Abigail did not hide her joy. The amount of weapons and food purchased was quite decent. Among all the trophies he acquired, the young man included a baseball cap from one of the dead. He immediately put the headdress on himself. It was the morning of the second day of the final qualifying round. The main character looked around. The road was clear. The young man had to go to the city center to capture the key area before others. Suddenly, the watch on Victor's hand glowed brightly. Both Abigail and Victor were horrified. This was far from a simple signal. Exactly the same signal was heard from all the watches on the hands of the killed opponents. This was the so-called killer's mark rule. This signal was updated every hour. A beam with the image of a player was projected from the dial. Everything here was controlled. From the dials of killed opponents, exactly the same projection appeared. A photo of Victor. He was listed as their only killer. The main character was defined as the participant with the most kills. The system also indicated his current location, Elevated Road. Victor couldn't do anything about it. He was in full view of observers and the system itself. When asked by her ward what all this meant, Abigail replied that she had never heard of such a rule. The only thing that the mentor could advise in this case was to move to the safest place possible during this hour, because those who are focused on equipment will come here in whole teams. The main character was at a loss as to why this rule was introduced and what it threatened. Abigail was nervous herself. She said she would try to figure it out. The girl literally screamed in Victor's ear to focus on his survival. The mentor left her observation point and left the office. Victor was left to his own devices and had no right to make a mistake. A powerful sandstorm was approaching the city again. The young man had no other options but to take the risk again. The main character rushed forward through a sand hurricane, guided only by his own instincts. At the same time, Abigail tried to find out from the manager what the new rule meant. The girl recalled that she had already turned a blind eye to something like this once, but she wouldn't allow it a second time. The manager was silent, waiting for the girl to calm down. The only thing he said was that he doesn't understand only one thing. Why, when everyone finds out about this, they behave like this. The man tried to convey to Abigail that they are just people who do what they are told. The girl was not going to let it get away with it. She also reminded them about the amplifiers, which were also their idea. The manager again remained silent in response. The girl was simply seething with indignation, but the boss just grinned. The conversation was not going well, so the manager decided to remind Abigail that her participant needed an experienced operator. The man sarcastically said that the mentor is still going to stand here, or will still return to her direct duties. Now Abigail was silent. The manager made it clear that Victor may have an emergency situation that requires the support of the operator, who instead of helping his player, prefers to have a discussion about the absurdity of the innovations. The girl nevertheless chose to express her indignation, telling the manager that this time he had already crossed the line. In the end, Abigail assured that they would cope with this innovation and let the boss sit and watch. As she was leaving, the girl threatened that at the end of the game, the old man should prepare for the worst. Looking back at the exit, the operator promised the man that she would not see each other again soon. The boss himself was sure of the opposite. Victor felt his way through the dust and sand. There was still quite a bit left. This time the game was truly unpredictable, where nothing could be predicted in advance. At the same moment, her operator was in touch with Cynthia. He gave the girl instructions to be more attentive. The operator reminded the girl that she was here for a reason, and if she failed here, she would be ashamed to look the lieutenant in the eyes. Cynthia did not like being taught. She replied that she herself understood everything perfectly well. The girl sat directly on the opponents she had killed. She felt that she was hungry. Cynthia counted on her fingers how many rivals she had already killed. There were 6 or 7 of them. She didn't remember exactly. The watch on her hand rang. The girl was terribly annoyed that the signal sounded every hour. The image of the participant with the most kills was visualized from the dial. It was Victor. In addition, the system indicated its exact location, an observation deck in the city center. Cynthia was angry that Victor had a body count of 14 people. She was noticeably behind on this. She considered this young man third-class trash, although she understood that he was not an ordinary opponent. The girl believed that it was time to take some action. She wanted to kill him as quickly as possible. This game was already starting to tire Cynthia. She missed Lieutenant Miller. The operator reminded the girl that, first of all, she now needs to prepare to take a position. The participant reluctantly agreed. It was very noisy outside, and Cynthia was involuntarily distracted by looking out the window. Clouds of dust and smoke rushed between the buildings, but the hurricane was not strong. The girl was delighted. Danger always spurred her to action. A bottle of flammable liquid was thrown into the air. When the rivals stood engulfed in fire, all that remained was to finish them off with a pistol. Several people were already lying on the floor. The rivals were not strong enough. Victor handled the combustible mixture as if he had been doing this all his life. Abigail's voice came through the earpiece. She suggested that Victor rest a little while she kept watch, because 10 hours had already passed. Meanwhile, the system notified everyone of the location of the member with the most kills. Current location, observation deck in the city center. Victor refused to rest, believing that it was impossible to relax now. A player with a grenade in his hand came into the main character's field of view. The opponent has already taken the pin, but before he had time to pull the pin, a bullet overtook him. Victor no longer counted the dead. He simply walked towards his goal. Abigail reminded him again about rest. The young man looked tired. The main character sank to the floor, leaning on the wall of the tower. He was indeed exhausted, but it was not physical fatigue. The mentor noted that he had just broken the record for the final qualifying rounds. Victor admitted that he does not have much joy about this, and all he feels is only a gradually growing thirst for revenge. And until he takes revenge, he has no right to lose. The young man had a goal: to kill Cynthia. To do this, he must still hold out. Abigail understood him like no one else. She was on his side. The time was 9 p.m. The destruction of the area was in full swing. Buildings collapsed, as if on command. Plumes of smoke clouded everything around. Victor looked at his watch. Another 5 minutes had passed. The game became a little more complicated with innovations, but the main character decided to ignore the rule of the killer's mark. In any case, when the clock strikes 11 hours 59 minutes, and if the winner is not determined, then everyone will disappear along with this destroyed city. Victor understood that everything would be decided tonight. The main character made a decision a long time ago. He will go to the end. The tension grew. In the arena that has begun to shrink, the intent to kill only increases. This is a brutal battle for survival between those who want to overcome death and those who want to preserve life. The number of opponents of the main character decreased every minute. Abigail was all on edge. Her charge sometimes behaved recklessly and risked his life too much. He himself had a different opinion. He was here to strengthen his fighting spirit. He looked at the enemy through the sight of his machine gun. The opponents were not all weak. There were also quite experienced and prepared ones. Equipment played an important role, making the task more difficult for the main character. But each of the rivals had vulnerabilities that were not protected by anything. There were also lovers of easy money who immediately became targets. The enemy is at gunpoint. Another moment, and the bullet hits the target. Cynthia, despite the warnings of her operator, headed into the thick of things. She firmly believed in her invulnerability. The girl, without even aiming, killed everyone who stood in her way, continuing to ignore her mentor's warnings. She believed that this was her battlefield and she would emerge victorious. Cynthia had no idea that at that moment, her most important enemy could be watching her through the sight of a machine gun. Victor, meanwhile, had already lost count of the opponents he had killed. He was completely absorbed in this process. A girl with a carefree look confidently walked along the street where the battle was raging. She was obsessed with murder, not distinguishing anyone around her. The girl continued to shoot, moving further and further. The main character's weapon did not stop for a minute. The players fell one after another. Abigail no longer adjusted anything. She only closely monitored the actions of her ward. The situation was complicated by the unfavorable natural environment. The earthquake reminded itself from time to time. At some point, Abigail ordered her player to urgently run for cover. A shell was flying in his direction. Another second, and he could have been killed. Cynthia admired the result of her actions with a jubilant look. Victor was thrown forward by the blast wave. A shell fired by Cynthia exploded part of the building in which Victor was located. The other players froze in amazement at what they saw. None of them have been capable of this until now. The main character fell unconscious. Abigail couldn't reach him. The mentor did not give up trying to reach her mentee. Finally, having come to his senses a little, Victor attempted to get up. Other players were also injured by the explosion. Some of them were wounded. Cynthia walked forward with a pursuit look, leaving behind many victims. Victor was stunned by the explosion, and on top of that, he could not find his pistol. The main character sat among the ruins, trying to get his bearings. Abigail screamed desperately. She could not establish normal contact with her ward. The system indicated the presence of several injuries on Victor's body. Victor held his wounded side, unable to rise. The bleeding was serious. Abigail looked at the monitor and couldn't believe it was all going to end like this. There is not a single living place left on the main character's body. The mentor did not lose hope of rectifying the situation. She pointed to Victor at the backpack next to him. The young man reached for his backpack with the last of his strength. He needed to get to the first aid kit. First of all, Victor unrolled the bandage to stop the bleeding. The wound was serious and immediate measures had to be taken. The main character could not afford to die. His mission was not over yet. Before his eyes was the image of a hated girl. He must take revenge. Victor gathered his strength to continue the fight. There were many wounds, but he was still alive. The main character looked around absent-mindedly. He had to get up and walk. There was no strength. Next to him was a flask of morphine. This could help numb the wounds. Cynthia moved on. There were 30 minutes before the end of the game, and there were still 3 participants left. The girl was sure that she had everything under control. Another thing that worried her was whether Lieutenant Miller was looking at her. Victor held the flask in his hand, hesitating to use it. He believed that this substance would give him the opportunity to die peacefully. The young man knew that if he injected himself with medicine, the physical pain would disappear. But he also experienced another pain, much more serious than physical suffering. It was an unbearable mental pain from the realization that he could not give up. But can he get back up and carry on? Weakened instincts consumed him. Before his eyes was the image of his beloved Julia. Abigail desperately tried to bring Victor to his senses. She insisted that the young man give himself an injection. The girl convinced her ward not to give up, and the main character agrees to inject himself with medicine. The mentor was hurrying her player. There was less and less time left. There were 25 minutes left before the end of the game. Cynthia was already confident of her victory. There are only 3 participants left. For her, this is nonsense. The girl's mentor reminded her that after finishing the game, she should not give interviews to anyone, because they had a non-disclosure agreement about RPG. Cynthia didn't argue. She did everything according to plan. One more shot and her target is hit. Clouds of flames erased everything in their path. The secret weapon was 100% justified. There were 15 minutes left before the end of the game. Cynthia needed to eliminate the last opponents. The girl was already planning her evening after the victory. All that remained was to finish off the last enemy. Lieutenant Miller was in her thoughts. The participant was pleased with herself, believing that she had done a good job. Cynthia slowly approached Victor. The seriously wounded opponent posed no danger to her. The girl put a gun to the head of her last opponent, enjoying the moment of dominance. Victor was still clutching the morphine flask in his hand. The girl looked expectantly at the torment of her enemy. Cynthia grinned brazenly, admitting that she would have had a lot more fun if the young man was in pain. The main character could not just surrender to his enemy, because he is here for revenge. A sharp blow struck by him deprives his main enemy of his arms. Ignoring the wild pain, the girl grabs the weapon with her good hand. Another second, and the bullet would have overtaken Victor, but with the last of his strength, he rises from his seat and strikes her. Another blow from his knife, and the girl lost one eye. With the last blow, the main character was going to cut his rival's throat. Cynthia seemed to feel no pain. She was obsessed with her victory, and could not afford to give up. The girl was so strong that Victor had no doubt she was using an amplifier. Cynthia held her opponent tightly by the neck. The guy felt his strength leaving him again. Despite her smaller stature, the girl easily tore her enemy off the ground, her eyes burning with hatred. Abigail watched in horror the last moments of her ward. She tried to shout to him, reminding him of what he had learned in training. Realizing the meaning of the words spoken by his mentor, Victor makes a grab with his legs, immobilizing his opponent. All the movements of the main character become elusive. It's as if he has turned into a whirlwind. But his strength is not enough, and Victor falls to the ground, leaving his enemy still alive. Noticing a knife next to him, the young man tries with all his might to reach it. This piece of steel is his last hope for retribution. Gathering all his will together, the main character crawls to the saving blade. At this very moment, the destruction of the city enters its final stage. Cynthia and Victor find themselves very close, helplessly sliding down under the influence of the all-destroying elements. At some point, the knife ends up next to the girl. Grasping the knife in her teeth, Cynthia still tries to attack. A sharp blade touches Victor's neck, cutting the skin. Fortunately, the force of the blow turns out to be insufficient, and the young man throws his opponent away from him. The city continues to collapse, and Victor and Cynthia inexorably fly into the resulting abyss. Abigail tries to shout to her player, but he doesn't hear her. The only question the mentor asks is whether he has given up yet. No, the main character was not going to give up. He finds strength and grabs a metal pipe protruding from the wall. Victor's enemy also does not intend to give up. With her only hand, she desperately holds onto his leg. Cynthia, still hoping for a miracle, seeks an answer from her operator. She cannot die like this. But contact with the operator has already been lost. The girl believes that she can start over. This is a game. In despair, Cynthia asks her enemy for help, and Victor now asks her to look him in the face. With the last of her strength, the girl tries to hold on to her opponent's leg, screaming hysterically in fear. This was the first time for her, while Victor had experienced moments when he was on the verge of death countless times. And now, the only thing he wanted was to look into the horror-filled gaze of his enemy. Even if he is destined to die, his enemy will not survive either. It was worth reaching the end of the game for this moment. Seeing that Victor is about to unclench his hands, Cynthia begins to scream even louder, the remnants of her sanity leaving her. The only thing she wanted now was not to win, but simply to survive. Threats against an opponent do not help the girl. For Victor, his life no longer has meaning. Out of her mind with horror, Cynthia continued to threaten her enemy, trying to reason with him that he too would not survive. The main character was glad that one of his enemies would cease to exist. In the end, seeing no point in stalling for time, the young man unclenches his hands and, together with his enemy, flies into the abyss. Victor agreed to die himself, as long as Cynthia did not survive. The enemy holding onto him fell, and the main character, although still alive, is already falling into the depths of this abyss. The sensor on the device signaled that there was only one player left. The winner is determined. This is Victor. The young man was caught by mighty branches a few meters from the edge of the abyss. The spectators greeted the winner with exclamations of admiration. Abigail is still trying to shout to her ward. Cynthia was lying at the bottom of the gorge. The desperate cry of her operator sank into the abyss, barely waiting for an answer. The girl was still alive, but already one step away from death. She asked the operator to contact Lieutenant Miller. The operator tried to explain something, but Cynthia said that this was her last request. Now, in the last minutes of her life, she was terribly sorry that everything happened exactly like that. If she had done everything properly, she would definitely have won. The operator fulfilled the request of his ward. Lieutenant Miller personally confirmed to Cynthia that she had indeed lost. The girl asked the lieutenant to praise her for the last time because everything she did was for his sake. But Miller refused her. The lieutenant was very cruel towards her. He admitted that she was just a pawn in his game and that she herself was disgusting. Miller called the girl a useless puppet and trash, but at the same time admitted that she did a good job. He also added that he would give her flowers, but what's the point, because soon she will turn into dust. From what she heard, Cynthia's whole world collapsed overnight. The physical pain was nothing compared to the mental anguish she was now experiencing. Tears of pain and despair rolled down Cynthia's cheeks. For the last time she uttered the name of the one for whom she risked so much. Victor lay on the branches, unable to move. What he had been striving for had come true, but he did not feel elated. He lost consciousness from pain, not understanding whether he was alive or had already died. A bright ray descended from the sky directly above him, ready to take him away and end his physical suffering. Someone from above loudly called his name. He shouted at him again and again. Victor did not understand where he was. The picture changed, and now he stood surrounded by burning buildings. He returned to the time and day when he almost died. The young man saw himself from the side. Cynthia bent over his body, amusingly. That day he lost the meaning of his life. Beloved, wife Julia. He remembered everything down to the smallest detail, and now he is back again on that terrible day. Julia is still alive before my eyes. Miller is next to her. Victor screamed, trying to stop the villain. He saw Cynthia's grinning face again. Cynthia was one of the targets of his revenge. Now she will disappear forever, Like the burnt ashes of his memories, Victor finally took his first revenge. There are 7 more people left to remove. Real revenge was ahead. Only after this his soul will calm down. The main character was lying on the bed, half oblivious. Abigail sat next to him. The girl tried to distract herself by looking at comics. Seeing that Victor had woken up, the girl put the book down. The young man was thirsty, and the first thing he asked for was water. After all the torments of hell he had gone through, a sip of pure water seemed to him a real pleasure. Only a few minutes later, Victor asked what happened to the game. Abigail did not answer the question. She only invited him to look out the window. Spurred by curiosity, the young man immediately got out of bed. Above the city in the air, there were modules with the image of Victor and the inscription, "A stage for the stars, a coliseum of true fighters." The main character reached the final. Having made sure that Victor had come to his senses, Abigail got ready to leave, citing being busy. At the same moment, the girl phoned someone, clarifying whether her interlocutor found out what she asked him about last time. The interlocutor, apparently, obtained the information she needed because the girl praised him for the quality work done. On the display in front of her was a dossier on Shane Bilhout, the brother-in-law of the main character. After some time, Victor and Abigail were sitting at a table in a summer cafe. They had done an amazing job, and now they could relax a little. The young man looked gloomily somewhere in front of him. He had no appetite at all. At the next table there was a family with a child. Victor involuntarily looked at the people peacefully resting. But he did not have time to enjoy this peace. He had to quickly go to train. The main character did not notice how he said it out loud, which caused Abigail's anger. The girl recalled that the doctor told the young man to rest. The mentor forbade Victor to move for the next 3 days. Victor reproached the girl for bringing him to this cafe with her own hands. Abigail explained that they were waiting for one person here, perhaps even someone the young man knew. With these words, the girl handed the phone to the main character, showing something. On the screen was a photo of Shane Bilhout, the main character's brother-in-law. Seeing that Victor recognized him, Abigail said that he was already on his way. The girl explained that Shane should be arriving at this stop soon. Realizing that Victor was very surprised by all this, Abigail explained that it was for this reason that she invited him to the cafe near the bus stop. Finally, a bus pulled up to the stop and the door opened. Victor stood up from the table, moving towards Shane. It was clear from Shane's eyes that he did not expect to see Victor here. The main character was very grateful to his brother-in-law, because if not for his help, Victor would not have been able to buy the amplifier, and accordingly would not have been able to win. The men shook hands, being glad of this meeting. Abigail knew that they were relatives, and she was quite surprised by such a boring family reunion. Victor wanted to know the reasons and a detailed explanation of everything planned. The girl promised to tell about everything at home, inviting Shane to come with them. Already at home in a quiet, comfortable atmosphere, the young people began to talk. Victor again asked a question about how Abigail managed to make inquiries about him and contact Shane. The girl said that on the day Victor bought the amplifier, she checked the name and address from where the money was deposited into his account. So she decided to find out the rest, although it was not easy. Abigail explained this surprise by saying that if there is already a person ready to personally support Victor, then why not arrange a meeting for them? Shane was grateful to Abigail for such a gesture of goodwill. He admitted that he followed the competition closely. Brother-in-law also said that he really liked the promotional video for the game, and the final qualifying round was very cool. Shane and Abigail smiled at each other, chatting pleasantly. The meeting took place in a calm, friendly atmosphere. At the end, Abigail handed the men a package of some papers. Victor and Shane were surprised, not understanding what it was. Abigail explained that they had a list of people they would hire in the future. Mr. Bilhout is also one of the staff members. The young men began to look through the papers. Victor was interested in why a stylist was needed. Abigail said that Victor is now a famous person. The girl also said that the commercial was created by Patrick, and he is a really talented person because he placed the hero's face in the first place. Victor admitted that he is not interested in fame, he just wants to participate in the games. But Abigail was interested in the budget that her ward had to review. The young man again stared at the documents, trying to understand the intricacies of budget planning. Abigail insisted on her point. Victor must become famous and attract sponsors. He is not just a labor force used to look good. At the end of the evening, the girl told Shane and Victor to discuss the remaining details together, and she herself was forced to leave them, citing the fact that she had a big day tomorrow and she needed to have a good rest. Addressing Shane personally, Abigail also reminded that since he now works here, he will need to go to the department tomorrow and change his address. When registering, he needs to be informed that he is from Victor's team and everything will be done right away for him without any problems. And the girl also asked Shane to take Victor with him because if he was left unattended, he would immediately run to the gym, violating the doctor's orders. After difficult trials, Victor was unusual in seeing a calm city environment. There were posters with Victor's image everywhere on the walls of the department. He really was famous. While the main character was examining the situation, his brother-in-law approached the reception desk. Shane explained that he took a job here. At that moment, the department's car suddenly braked. Shane needed to sign, but the problem was that it also required the employer's signature. Armed and masked men jumped out of the approaching car. Brother-in-law was still trying to figure out how to fill out the forms. At that moment, the armed militants were already running towards the building. A moment later, they opened fire right at the walls of the department. When the explosions occurred, Shane and Victor were just filling out paperwork. Seeing the danger, the main character ordered to immediately take cover. Victor suddenly grabbed his brother-in-law by the jacket and dragged him behind the reception desk. The militants burst into the building and were now standing, assessing the situation. The police blocked the bandits' path. Law enforcement officers tried to stop the militants. The policeman was the first to take the blow. The bandits were unstoppable. Shane and Victor were at that moment behind the wooden counter. The brother-in-law sat huddled in a ball, trembling with fear, while Victor tried to assess the situation. People screamed in horror. Panic began. The bandits demanded everyone to shut up and not move. The whole appearance of the militants indicated that they were well-trained and were professionals in their field. One of the militants had an explosive device attached to his belt. Victor recognized such things immediately. The militant commander ordered the operation to begin. People were out of their minds with fear. The panic only grew. Bandits began to grab people at gunpoint. The commander ordered to kill the first man he came across. Despite the victim's request to spare him, one of the bandits still carried out the order. Following the first victim, several more innocent people were killed. The department employees froze in horror, afraid to move. Unfortunately, this did not help either. The bandits continued to shoot at people. Victor was in no hurry to come out of hiding. He didn't know what to do best in this situation, and besides, he was unarmed. Having determined what was what, the main character explained to his brother-in-law that these were not ordinary bank robbers. They target the person in charge of the terminal. Victor needed to immediately consult a specialist, and he called Abigail. The mentor did not answer for a long time, and the situation required immediate measures. Finally, the girl answered, wondering what kind of shots were being heard. The main character explained that the department was attacked by terrorists. The young man asked Abigail to inform the police. He quickly hung up, leaving Abigail at a loss. The brother-in-law was terribly frightened. He sought protection from his brother, not understanding what to do now. The main character was clearly aware of the situation. Now he will not be able to cope with them. The only thing Victor could advise was to crawl in the other direction. Shane tried to pull himself together. He was willing to do anything to stay alive. The terrorists looked around, looking for anyone who could hide. One of the militants was already next to the counter where Victor was hiding. A few centimeters from the young man lay a fountain pen, dropped in the bustle, which could give away his location. The main character picked up a fountain pen, intending to use it as an item of self-defense if necessary. Victor tried not to give himself away by the slightest movement. He and his brother-in-law needed to hold out until the police arrived. A bandit standing nearby listened intently, but finding nothing, he informed the commander that there was no one here. Victor sat without moving, trying not to give himself away, even by breathing. The bandit was still nearby. Suddenly, a surviving but seriously wounded employee crawled out from behind a nearby table. The surviving man immediately came to the attention of the militant. The bandit aimed his weapon at the poor fellow, bending him so that it was right in front of Victor's face. Taking advantage of the opportune moment, the main character grabbed the barrel of the machine gun. The next moment, the young man pulled the bandit under the table, stabbing him in the neck with a fountain pen. The bandit had a knife with him, with which the main character dealt another blow. With his other hand, Victor covered the bandit's mouth, not giving him the opportunity to scream. The bandit was killed, and Victor finally had a weapon in his hands. The brother-in-law, who was sitting nearby, silently watched what was happening all this time. Suddenly, a pistol fell next to him. Shane held his breath in surprise. At this moment, the police arrived at the department building. Seeing the law enforcement officers, the terrorists decided to urgently change tactics. The employees were sitting on the floor in front of them. Victor and Shane finally breathed freely. But Victor, just in case, asked his brother-in-law if he knew how to shoot. The guy answered in the affirmative. Suddenly, another force majeure occurred that could ruin everything. The telephone rang on the floor nearby. Abigail called. She was very worried about them. Victor explained that the situation was very serious and that they would not be able to hold out for more than 10 minutes. The girl tried to calm Victor down. The police had already arrived, and in 3 or 4 minutes they would open fire to kill. Oddly enough, the main character was not happy with this. Victor asked the police to delay the storming of the building for 2 minutes. Abigail did not understand what Victor was up to, but he did not explain, turning off the phone. Turning to his brother-in-law, the main character said to get ready. Victor rose above the counter and opened fire. What was happening threw the terrorists into a stupor. They died before they could find their bearings. Shane also got in on the action, sitting at the counter next to his brother. One of the terrorists suddenly recognized the hero. The bandit never expected to see the winner of the game here. The militants continued to die one after another. The terrorists were confused, not finding a commander nearby, but they could not understand who these people were shooting at them. Victor continued to shoot while his brother-in-law hid behind the counter to reload his pistol. Shane's unexpected exclamation distracted the main character from the bandits for a second. As it turned out, the guy ran out of ammunition. Left alone with the weapon, the main character continued to shoot. 2 terrorists ran straight towards Victor. One of them had explosives. The bandit with the explosives was already holding the remote control in his hand. The main character understood that he had to neutralize them before the bomb exploded. A second later, one of the bandits running towards Victor was wounded. But alas, the main character ran out of ammunition. Calmly approaching Victor, the bandit with explosives ordered him to go down with him. The young man looked at the terrorist, turning over in his head all the possible options for his actions. The bandit's finger was ready to fall on the button at any moment, detonating the explosive device. Victor had one more way to rectify the situation. Suddenly, a shot rang out from the side, wounding the terrorist. At his cry, other bandits turned around. At that moment, the police burst into the building. The terrorists found themselves in a hopeless situation. The police were ordered to open fire to kill. The leader of the bandits was not going to give up so easily, and he also gave the order to attack. The police opened fire, eliminating the bandits one by one. Having killed every single terrorist, the police approached the counter where Victor and Shane were. Law enforcement officials said there was no longer a threat. The police asked if the main character was okay with his friend. For Victor, this was all dangerous, despite the fact that the police were only a little late. The police arrived on time and completely cleared the premises of terrorists. Only now, feeling safe, did Shane begin to come to his senses. Brother-in-law told Victor that everything was fine with him, thanks to him. Abigail arrived at the scene and was horrified by what she saw. The girl was very worried about her ward. First of all, the girl attacked Victor with accusations for interfering in the shootout. Noticing the condescending look of the protagonist, Abigail immediately apologized for her harsh tone. Looking back at the battlefield that the vestibule had become, Victor headed out with the others. The killed terrorists remained lying on the floor. Victor saw a tattoo on the body of one of the terrorists. It wasn't just a drawing. The tattoo depicted an eagle soaring in the sky as a symbol of the resistance unit. This tattoo was a symbol of faith, which Victor also got for himself along with his comrades. And the young man never expected to see this here. At this moment, an analysis of the situation was taking place at the Supreme Command headquarters. The Chief of Staff was very angry with his people. He accused them of incompetence, and if not for his intervention, it is unknown how it would have ended. A press conference was held in the control room. The host of the event, as usual, tried to keep the audience on their toes. The boss had previously given instructions to block the press as much as possible, simply explaining that they were able to successfully suppress the terrorists. The subordinate reminded us of one important aspect: how to deal with the survivors. In response to the surprise of the chief, the officer said that the two survivors provided great assistance in the suppression, and this is reflected in the provided report. On top of that, there is a high probability that the media will contact them. The leader became furious at what he heard. The situation risked getting out of control. The report included the name of the winner of the game, Victor, 3rd grade. At the same time, in another office, Abigail said that they had successfully signed a contract, but with certain conditions. According to the contract, they will have to indirectly advertise the company in the next game. The terms of the contract will improve as you progress successfully in the following games. Victor was not happy with the terms, but Abigail explained that it was just business. Shane gradually delved into the intricacies of working in the company, asking clarifying questions along the way. While Abigail was distracted by Shane's questions, the main character was about to leave the office, saying that he needed to go to the gym. The teacher was terribly angry because he couldn't study, and besides, she hadn't finished speaking yet. Victor reminded that the 3 days indicated by the doctor had already passed. The young man was about to open the door, but Abigail stopped him by asking if he knew what would happen in the next game. The main character froze in place, while the mentor grinned that of course he couldn't know anything. Victor was interested in what new the girl was going to tell. Abigail reminded that the final games change every year, and the young man should read the documents that she recommended. The next game will be a doubles match. Pairs were often used in sports, and the game of survival was no exception. Just like in most doubles sports, the first thing that is required of the participants is unity with their partner. An important aspect was what kind of partner Victor would meet and how they would adapt to each other. Abigail explained that all of this would play a key role and ultimately determine whether Victor wins or loses. The young man still has to pass the test and find a suitable partner for himself. After some time, Victor visited an outdoor training ground. Everyone who came was checked through a special terminal. It was Victor's turn to go through the detector. The main character knew in advance that it would not be easy for him to find a suitable partner. Moreover, this is important in a game where there is a calculation between life and death. This is why all participants take the test here. After checking the results, which are publicly available, they will be able to select a person with the characteristics that suit them. The communications training ground has essentially become an examination center to recruit participants for their skills. The main character faced a difficult task. Finding someone like him was extremely difficult. Since Victor participated in something like this for the first time, he had to undergo this rite of passage to a new stage. This was a test that assessed intelligence, perception, and combat ability. The first was a mental ability test. The intelligence test stressed the young man. He was not confident enough in himself. The main character understood that he had to give it his all and do everything to successfully complete it. After 30 minutes, the test was completed. The second stage was a perception test. Victor entered a small room and began to wait. Directly above him were infrared rays. They seemed to probe the subject. The main character again found himself in a city engulfed in fire. There was military equipment nearby. In this test, the young man will have to feel the entire situation on the battlefield. Victor had to make sure and memorize the whole situation. The image, sounds, and smells. It was necessary to remember everything, right down to the direction of the wind. The test started and the first task was to drag the pieces around to get the big picture. Victor needed to use the information received through all the senses. Basically, the main character had to put together a puzzle using all the puzzles. Everything had to be put together without a single mistake. The time was up, and now Victor was waiting for the result. The perception test was over, and a new stage awaited the young man. Next was the combat ability test. Here, Victor felt more confident. Abigail and Shane were in the office at that moment. The brother-in-law was successfully delving into the essence of his new work, and the girl could finally relax a little. On the monitor in front of Shane, there was one of the selection stages in which Victor participated. Brother-in-law was distracted by Abigail's very unexpected question. The girl asked if Victor was married. Shane dodged the question by asking whether such personal information was required. However, Abigail did not insist on an answer, but nevertheless this question was important to her. By that time, the test had already ended. The girl returned to her computer, waiting for the results. A message arrived on the phone. Abigail froze in anticipation. She only wanted good news. In total, the girl has already received 121 messages offering a partnership with Victor. The choice was very difficult, since it was physically impossible to accept the partnership offer from everyone at once. But this task was not a priority at the moment. Regarding the game, Abigail explained that the map is divided into 3 large types: combat type, survival type, and mission type. The problem was that it was unknown which card would come up. Finally, the results of the test that Victor took came. The grades weren't bad. In the perception stage, the young man scored 99 points. In combat abilities, he had 98 points. In terms of intelligence, the results were disappointing, only 53 points. Abigail was disappointed by this result because she was confident in Victor. The girl explained that now they would need to find a participant with a high level of intelligence. The teacher began to have a headache from tension. The girl joked that it was because of her high intelligence scores. Based on the results of the test, Abigail assumed that the creators would now try to grab Victor to use him at their discretion as a tool. The girl reproached her ward for the fact that he should have studied at least a little. Then this would not have happened. Meanwhile, messages continued to arrive on her phone. To Victor's questioning glance, the girl replied that now these messages are not so important. Now his first priority is to focus on training. Now the main character has finally reached the gym. Shane was next to him. Victor set himself a certain number of repetitions of each exercise, but after a break and previous injuries, the load was not easy for him. However, for the young man, this was not a reason to feel sorry for himself. He carried out the plan he had set for himself. The muscles ached from the strain. In addition, Shane reminded that there was only a week left until the final game. There were many potential competitors in the room, so the protagonist had to surpass them all. Knowing his perseverance and fanatical attitude towards exhausting training, Shane tried to get Victor out of the gym on time. Going out into the street, the brother-in-law noticed several suspicious people in the crowd of passers-by. Shane considered it necessary to warn Victor that they were being followed, but the main character himself noticed this. 3 strange personalities relentlessly followed them, remaining a little at a distance. Victor noticed that, in addition to everything else, these people were armed. The main character warned his brother to be prepared for the fact that at a certain moment he would have to run away. The situation was unclear, and Victor thought that he needed to call Abigail. The main character dialed the mentor's number and immediately ordered his brother-in-law to run. The guys rushed off, but their pursuers did not lag behind. Unknown people tried to catch up with those fleeing. Another minute and they will overtake them. At this moment, Victor understood that even if he could break away, his brother-in-law's physical capabilities left much to be desired. The main character had no choice but to stop and deal with the situation. Shane did not like this idea, but Victor insisted that he continue to run. The main character stood opposite his pursuers, who were in no hurry to attack. The young man tried to estimate how long he could hold out against a man with a gun. The guy with the pistol was in no hurry to use the weapon. It is quite possible that he wanted to find out something first. At that moment, a motorcycle approached them at full speed. The biker taxied right between the pursuers and Victor. The bandits were confused. They did not foresee outside interference. The man on the motorcycle stopped, but did not take any action yet. Suddenly, the bandits turned around and walked away, leaving the main character in bewilderment. Shane and Victor watched in silence as their pursuers left. The motorcyclist also did not show himself in any way. The next moment, the biker took off his helmet and turned to the guys. The stranger called Victor by name, checking, just in case, if he had made a mistake. With a hint of sarcasm in his voice, the biker noticed that the main character, as it turned out, had many enemies. Victor looked in surprise at their unexpected savior. Brother-in-law thought for a moment that the two knew each other. With a subtle, friendly smile, the biker introduced himself. The guy's name was Edgar. The guys shook hands. Victor thanked his savior, because in fact, he is alive thanks to him, but at the same time asked how he knew his name. Edgar said that he saw him on the day when the testing took place. As soon as the results came out, the main character immediately left the test room. Victor, however, believed that he was obliged to thank his savior. At some point, the main character noticed on Edgar's hand exactly the same watch as his. This guy was also a participant, and everything that happened must not have been the usual generosity. Victor began to think, faces are not shown on the scoreboard, so apart from names and scores, nothing is known. The fact that Edgar unmistakably approached him indicated that the guy was carefully watching him. The main character's thoughts were interrupted by the question whether he needed a partner. Victor explained that he cannot choose on his own. His operator is responsible for this part. Edgar understood that Victor was slightly discouraged because no one could imagine how he would get along with a hastily chosen person. To dispel all doubts, the biker pressed the sensor on his watch. Edgar's dossier was displayed on the virtual display. In general, the guy's skills were modest. Perception, 88 points. Combat abilities, 20 points. But in the intelligence category, the biker received the highest score, 100 points. Noticing the amazement on the faces of Shane and Victor, Edgar asked what they would say to this. The biker admitted that he received such points on the first day. However, he almost died during the final qualifying round. As a sign of proof, the young man demonstrated a prosthetic instead of his left leg, adding that if he couldn't choose the right partner, then in the next selection, he would most likely die. Victor was shocked, and accordingly, he was interested in only one question: why Edgar was doing this. The biker admitted that he set a goal for himself, to win at all costs. The main character remembered how at the beginning of the previous game, Abigail asked in the same way why he was so desperate. Then Victor answered in exactly the same way: he must win. While the main character was remembering himself, a car drove up to them. An angry Abigail jumped out of the car. She was worried about what happened and where the pursuers were. Victor tried to reassure her that the danger had passed for now. Taking advantage of the opportune moment, the main character announced that he had found what he needed. He found a partner. Edgar raised his hand in greeting. Stepping aside, Victor asked what Abigail thought about all this and whether this guy could be trusted. The girl agreed that the prospective partner was quite good, and besides, he was a genius. After some time, Abigail invited Edgar to her office. There was a document on the table in front of the young man. The girl offered to sign a contract with them. The mentor reminded that there were 6 days left before the start of the game, and they simply did not have time for doubts. In response to the young man's silence, Abigail persistently asked him to trust them. The signature was put, and now all that remained was to prepare for the best union in the world. In the following days, the main character tried his best to train Edgar. As an example and inspiration, a booklet appeared with the loud title, Survival, on the cover of which there was a photo of Victor. Edgar trained, giving his best. Finally, the day came for the ceremonial announcement of the start of the game. Victor and Edgar arrived at their destination, accompanied by Abigail and Shane. On the wall of the building, there was a poster with Lieutenant Miller and his main slogan, "Glory awaits you." Victor restrained his emotions as best he could. Besides, as the guard said, Abigail was worried herself. The security guard said that the girl made it to the final for the first time. The employee smiled and wished the guys to definitely win. Abigail timidly touched her ward and asked in an uncertain voice if he could win. Victor replied that he had to do it. In turn, the main character asked Edgar how he was feeling. The young man replied that everything was fine. After all the parting words had been said, Edgar and Victor headed inside the building. The participants went inside. There, an interview with one of the previous participants was shown on a huge screen. The man admitted that participation in the game meant everything to him. That man lost his arm, But despite all this, he confidently declared that if he had another chance, he would unconditionally apply to participate. Next, the participants proceeded to the hall in which the portals were located. Already on the spot, Victor clarified with Edgar that the partners should land in the same place. Edgar confirmed that this is exactly what is planned. The protagonist partner added that if Victor lands and cannot find him, he will need to go beyond the nearest limit of the map and wait for him there. In other words, if Victor does not know the direction, then you just need to walk along the edge and they will meet. The portals were already open and were waiting for their pilots. Both guys were noticeably worried, in no hurry to take their seats. Having made a symbolic gesture for good luck, the partners each went to their own portal. A few minutes after launch, the portals landed in the forest in the vicinity of the City of Assassins. Feeling slightly dizzy, Victor left his portal. The system notified that the probability of equipment dropping here was at a very low level. Moderate level environmental factors. External danger is indicated at an extremely high level. The forest was suspiciously quiet. You couldn't even hear the insects. Victor urgently needed to find Edgar. Victor had a feeling of some kind of enclosed space. First of all, the main character decided to move 100 meters away from the port. Everything seemed very strange. Victor had already walked for about 10 minutes, but he saw nothing except natural objects. There were 49 minutes left before the connection with the partner was established. The young man decided to move another 100 meters away. The thought was already spinning in his head that Edgar had betrayed him, but he quickly drove away these thoughts. The main character decided that he needed to quickly contact Abigail so that she could help him. The sensor indicated that the connection could not be established. Upset and having lost all hope, Victor sat down under a tree. After sitting and thinking, the young man decided that first of all, he needed to get out of the forest. City of Assassins is different from other maps that could be intuitively understood. It was still quiet, but something still bothered Victor. After passing through a cornfield, the young man came to a small building with a light burning inside. The main character decided to look inside. He was interested in whether there were any people here. Not seeing anything through the window, Victor went inside. In a small room, there was a table on which someone had left food. The food was hot, as if someone had just prepared it. But despite all this, there was no feeling that anyone was here. The young man immediately assumed that it was a trap. The main character did not dare to eat this food, because the system warned about an extremely high level of external danger. There was a chest of drawers against the wall, and Victor decided to check the contents of the drawers. Inside, the guy found a lighter. There were marks from a shotgun on the wall. With an experienced look, the young man determined that it was quite recently. On the table, there was a notebook left by someone that looked like a diary. Victor opened the diary and began to read. Someone wrote that a month had already passed since his brother disappeared. The police only pretended to be looking for him, but did not even allocate the required number of people for this. Writing in a diary, the girl admitted that there was something else that she did not tell the police and her family. The reason why her brother disappeared. The main character never expected to find something like this here, and it is not yet clear what all this could mean. Victor decided that it was better to take this thing with him. At that moment, he felt something moving outside. Victor stood at the window and hid. Nothing has changed. It is not clear whether there was a person outside the window or just the wind. The house was located right next to a cornfield, in the density of which anyone could be hiding. Victor experienced a strange feeling of anxiety, as if something sinister was hiding there. One way or another, it was undesirable to stay in the house, and the young man hurried to leave the building as quickly as possible. The young man noticed something suspicious in this map in advance. Victor was told that in a normal pairs competition, everyone lands next to their partners. But now he could neither meet his partner nor contact Abigail. The main character did not understand what conditions he must fulfill. As Edgar said, he must go outside the map and wait for him there. Victor moved forward, listening intently to the silence. There was only a cornfield around. Suddenly, 2 dots appeared ahead. The young man came closer and saw an empty truck. The front door was open. The word had just come out of it. Upon a detailed examination, the main character discovered that the car did not have a left wheel. The The truck's engine was still running. Judging by the fact that the battery has not yet died, someone recently drove it. Suddenly, something vibrated in the young man's pocket. The sound came from the diary. The young man took out the book and opened it. The diary was inexplicably updated. Now it was written there that Mom noticed their family was being followed, and it had been going on for a whole week. The writer said that in their family no one denied his mother's words, because he and his father also felt this look. The diary said that contacting the police did not yield any results, and the villagers accused them of madness. It was also written there that soon the father of the writing girl went for cartridges, but never returned. From everything written, Victor concluded that the owner of the truck is the father of the girl who wrote the diary. Next to the truck, the main character discovered traces of male feet. The tracks led towards a cornfield. The footprints belonged to only one person, which meant that he was here alone. Victor looked into the car. Logically, the shotgun should have remained inside. The young man's assumptions did not deceive him. The shotgun was located in the back seat. The main character examined the weapon. There were no cartridges in it. The young man looked around the surroundings again. The cornfield ended at the end of the village. Victor remembered Edgar's words. If he lands and cannot find a partner, then he needs to go beyond the nearest limit of the map and wait there. Even if the direction is not known, you just need to walk along the edge and they will meet there. Well, in that case, you need to go and look for cartridges later. First of all, Victor needs to find Edgar. There was pitch darkness and damp air all around. All these negative factors literally enveloped the young man's body. Weakened instincts constrained his movements, but the main character understood that he could not stop. He must go through this darkness. Ahead there was a gorge, the bridge across which was destroyed. The situation looked ridiculous. The main character spent so much time and effort, and now he's stuck here. The young man took out a flask to take a sip of water. In general, as it turned out, the map was not as big as it might seem at first glance. Victor had no choice but to return back. Time passed, and he urgently needed to meet with Edgar. The main character entered the forest again and suddenly heard a noise. Someone was screaming, and the sound was very close. The diary made itself felt again. The young man opened it and began to read. The girl wrote that her dad never returned, and her mother went crazy. And last night, through the window, the author discovered something watching them from the cornfield. As the girl wrote, this something has returned again. The little girl said that her Aunt Nancy, who lived in the house down the road, also disappeared. Moreover, this news no longer surprised the girl. The aunt disappeared, screaming loudly. Victor thought that the one who had just screamed was the same woman named Nancy. The main character looked around in fear. It became really scary, especially if you don't understand what you're dealing with. The young man took out a shotgun and pointed it in the direction where the noise was coming from. Suddenly, Edgar came out of the forest to meet the main character. The partner sat down under a tree and began to greedily drink water. He admitted that he had already thought that Victor had died. Edgar said that he also heard the scream and came running because he thought he could find clues or other participants, but he was lucky that he still found his partner. As it turned out, both guys had no connection. Edgar said that after he was convinced that there was no connection, he ran along the nearest edge of the map until he met Victor. The main character admitted that before they crossed paths, he picked up a diary in an empty house near a cornfield. Victor handed Edgar a diary, explaining that the entries are updated every time he goes somewhere. Edgar explained that most likely the diary is updated when the player finds a clue, and this could be their chance to escape from this map. The main character suggested in this case not to wait, but to immediately move forward. Noticing a shotgun in Victor's hands, Edgar was glad that in case of danger they could use the weapon. But the main character warned that there were no cartridges. Edgar wasn't particularly upset. They just now have the task of finding cartridges. Having determined the plan of action, the partners headed forward to the exit from the forest. Now that strength, endurance, and high intelligence are simultaneously connected, 50% of the problems are practically considered solved. The protagonist's partner found his way around surprisingly easily. The young man had developed not only intelligence but also intuitive thinking. Ahead there was another section of cornfield, but the absolute silence that reigned around did not foretell anything terrible. Edgar not only noticed every detail, but also logically translated everything into the information they needed. And now, having discovered tire tracks on the ground, the young man immediately determined that there must definitely be a house in this vicinity. Edgar had a candle with him, and to make his path easier, Victor lit it. Now it will be easier to navigate the cornfield. The diary reminded me again, and Victor began to read. This time it mentioned someone named Grandfather Bilbo. The girl who kept the diary described her grandfather as a very caring person. No further information about this man was provided. The content this time was short, but the page showed a map of the area. Pointing to a house on the page, Edgar suggested that Bilbo's grandfather most likely lived there. As the main character's partner had hoped, a small house was soon discovered on their way. Considering the natural factors and the long road through the thickets, the guys were a little tired. Victor suggested that they rest here for a while. The guys began to examine the empty house, and Edgar discovered cartridges in one of the boxes. Unfortunately, there were only 6 of them, but it's still better than nothing. Victor also discovered a small box and was about to open it when a sudden noise distracted the guys. Someone was wandering around outside the window. The partners came closer, trying to see this something in the darkness. The unknown creature turned out to be a monster. Its gnarled hand with sharp nails probed the ground, as if it was trying to identify living people nearby. The monster on all 4s was getting closer to the house. The monster hiding in the guise of a man aroused mixed feelings and doubts in Victor. At first glance, his figure might indeed seem ordinary, but upon closer examination, it became obvious that he had inhuman features. Edgar immediately rejected his assumption. The monster only looked like a person. The most unusual and noticeable element were its claws. Instead of ordinary human fingers, the monster had sharp and curved claws, similar to the claws of predatory animals. These claws testified to his hidden danger and ability to deliver fatal blows. Victor inserted cartridges into the shotgun. The aiming device was precisely aimed at the monster. The eyes of the protagonist focused on their target. Now all that remains is to wait to see what actions the monster will take. It was clear that the monster was looking for something. It, like a wild animal, determined everything by smell, deeply inhaling the air and widening its nostrils to catch even the most subtle smell. His keen sense of smell made it possible to distinguish even the most inconspicuous traces. The smell of fresh grass, smoke from a distant fire, or even a hint of human presence. Edgar felt a shiver run down his spine. It seemed to him that the monster was looking right at him. In the darkness, his silhouette seemed ominously motionless, but at the same time, it was felt that every muscle of his was tense, ready for instant action. The sudden reversal and disappearance of the monster in the corn thickets caused mixed feelings of relief and anxiety. Edgar felt the tension in his body begin to subside as the danger moved away, but at the same time he realized that the situation was not yet completely resolved. The monster no longer made itself felt. It is quite possible that it was simply reconnoitering the situation, but fortunately did not detect the presence of people. The guys were in no hurry to relax, because the monster could return at any moment. Edgar assumed that from now on the monster would constantly haunt them. One way or another, the problem will have to be solved. At the same time, the diary in Victor's pocket again showed signs of life. It has already become a pattern that the diary is active at the most critical moments. The main character took out a notebook and began to read. There was a description of the monster's behavior. He is like a nightmare. He is seen by those to whom he appears, and not seen by those to whom he is not shown. In other words, this could be understood as the fact that the monster itself decides who to show itself to. Then there was a warning and advice. They must run. Edgar explained that if they went on foot, the monster would undoubtedly catch them. This means that they will have to find a method of transportation that will allow them to escape persecution and remain safe. At the same moment, Victor noticed that the map in the diary was being updated. Bilbo's grandfather's garage was now listed there. The main character suggested that the car should remain in the garage, but what to do with driving skills? This time his partner reassured him. He knows how to drive a car. Trying not to make a sound, the guys began to sneak along the wall. There was no sound around, but in their situation, silence could be both a sign of safety and a sign of a new threat. Finally, they arrived. The garage building loomed ahead. The guys looked around again to see if there was a monster nearby. It was quiet in the thickets of corn. Only a light breeze rustled the leaves. There really was a truck in the garage. Edgar asked his partner where he intended to sit. Victor replied that he was going to settle down in the back. Inside the cabin, Edgar found the ignition key hanging on a hook. The young man inserted the key and started the engine. The car rattled as usual. There was no time to wait, and the driver ordered his partner to climb into the back. Suddenly, a sharp, sickening smell began to spread throughout the garage. The source of the smell could not be determined. Victor's eyes caught the movement, and he sharply raised his weapon to the upper corner of the room. A monster hung from above, clinging to the walls with its claws. It was unclear whether it had been waiting for them in advance or had slipped unnoticed through the open door. The reaction of the protagonist was lightning fast. He shot at the place where the monster was located. Then something strange happened. After the shot was fired, the monster disappeared, leaving behind only a cloud of smoke and stench. Victor jumped into the back and ordered to quickly leave. Edgar pressed the gas, and the truck took off. But alas, the guys won't be able to relax yet. The monster ran after them, not lagging behind even a meter. The speed of the monster was impressive. Just a moment longer, and it would overtake its prey. The main character started shooting again. Edgar pressed on the gas, trying to squeeze everything he could out of the old truck. It has not yet been possible to break away from the monster. The guys were terribly nervous. The situation was becoming uncontrollable. The monster deftly dodged bullets without slowing down its speed. The monster had incredible speed and endurance. It tirelessly pursued the truck, not showing even the slightest sign of fatigue. There was practically no hope for salvation, and the situation became increasingly hopeless. The car was racing at the limit of its capabilities, and there were very few cartridges in the shotgun. When it seemed that there was no longer a chance to survive, the monster suddenly fell behind. The guys still managed to break away. At the same time, the diary vibrated again. The contents of its pages were updated at such a speed that it was as if the notebook itself had gone crazy. The exhausted monster looked with despair after the retreating car. It seems that this time he will be left with nothing. The main character did not take his eyes off the monster, no longer sure of anything. The open mouth of the monster emitted a terrible scream mixed with a terrible fetid odor. Even at such a distance he smelled of rage. Victor again remembered the words from the diary. He is like a nightmare, and they must run as far as possible. The guys drove off a decent distance and stopped under a canopy. Victor opened the diary and began to read again. It was not possible to move further. Due to the downpour, the road was blocked. But alas, as they say, trouble does not come alone. The diary said that the only communication tower in the village had broken down. This happened after 3 people went missing. It looked like someone had planned it all. It was written in the diary that there was a base station on the communication tower. Now Victor understood the reason for the lack of communication with the operator. Interrupting the protagonist from reading, Edgar said that they needed to go. Victor clarified that now they will go to a specific place, to the communications tower. Having put on their raincoats, the guys slowly set off on their way. Because they couldn't travel by truck now, they had to be especially careful. After a moment's pause, Edgar said that in all likelihood they were on the right path. Soon the spears of the tower loomed in front of the guys. But besides the tower, the protagonist's partner paid attention to something else. There was a gun store nearby.